Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you guys tuning in to all these shows. Crazy to think that everyone would want to listen to us two idiots talk about whatever, but yeah, we got a special show going on tonight. We got probably the smartest guy that'll ever be on the show, which is a nice little bounce back from Galdi, which is maybe the dumbest guy we've ever had on the show.
That is quite the contrast we're about to have.
No, I'm just kidding. Galdi's not dumb. But yeah, we got Corey Deacon here. He's I guess I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of give us your background a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
So I'm a neuroscientist, a doctorate in medical science and a doctorate in natural medicine. I guess what brings me here today is a lot of our our clinic called Nirvana Health here in Calgary. We do a lot of work with concussion, and that was how I got introduced to Jared, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So my story and how I got into neuroscience and I do something called functional and integrative medicine was I actually suffered from a lot of issues from concussion in my teenage years, and it was kind of interesting because I never had problems until I hit my kind of master's degree at university, and I started getting massive issues with my brain. Like we ripped the song "Astronaut in the Ocean" at the start.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of funny. It's appropriate because that's what I felt like. It was like my brain couldn't shut off yet. I just felt like I was drowning emotionally, intellectually, cognitively. I was getting panic attacks, I was getting depression, suicidal ideations. It was pretty bad. And I went to doctors for help, obviously. And, it was like, there was no question about what caused me to get there. It was like, this just happens sometimes. And hated that answer because I was a researcher, I'm a scientist. I want to know what's going on here, right?
Most people would hate that answer of, it just happens.
That's a stupid answer.
It's just a cop out, It's like to me that there's a word in medicine called idiopathic, which means we don't know. Basically, I'm an idiot. Right? So I didn't like that. So they were throwing drugs at me, and to me it just didn't make sense. It was like, well, if we're not figuring out what actually happened here, what's the point of me just taking meds, right? I'm just gonna be taking these for the rest of my life. It's like, that's usually how it goes. And I'm like, okay, I don't accept that. So I started digging into the research, more to help myself. And I started, what I was finding was there's all this great functional neuroimaging out there, and all of it is just at universities. It's not being used to guide treatment whatsoever. And, psychiatry and psychology, I thought it was crazy. It's like every other medical field looks at what they're treating, right? If you're a gastroenterologist, you're looking at the gut. If you're an endocrinologist, you're looking at hormone levels. And all of a sudden we have, psychology and psychiatry just not even looking at the organ they're treating, right?
Yeah.
Neurology, you get MRIs and CTs, like, okay, yeah, that's helpful to rule out a structural problem, but how often you have a structural issue is very, very minimal, right? Even after concussions. So, I started digging into functional MRI technology, and then I came across something called quantitative EEG and SW Loretta, which I have some images we could share later.
Yep.
And this was really bridging the path between really expensive technology that only big universities could afford, and then technology that was easily accessible by smaller clinics that you could actually assess the brain.
Right.
We started developing a huge database. Like right now, I think we have about 20,000 brains in our database with biomedical data that actually helps us understand why people are having the symptoms they're having. Because, anxiety, depression, cognitive issues, mood swings, all these sleep issues, right? Pain even. I mean, we can't even experience pain without the brain. If you pull the brain out, you're not even going to feel pain, right? We're able to actually find like why. Why is it that somebody's having these problems? And it's kind of cool because we found about 13 unique subtypes of issues that cause virtually every symptom in the brain, and different permutations, right? Where some people might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I've seen some poor individuals that have had like 10 of the subtypes, but you can go in and you can start resolving them with predictive therapies to say, hey, this is what's happening, and let's go in and actually fix this stuff, right?
So just to backtrack you for a half second here, you said you have about a catalog of 20,000, you said?
Yeah.
How long has that taken you to build that catalog? How long have you kind of been at?
About 7 years.
7 years, okay.
Yeah.
And is it something where each year you're kind of finding more and more you're able to build that catalog? Like first year was 100 people, next it was 500, or is it pretty consistent each year? 'Cause it takes time.
Yeah, it's definitely been building up. When we first started, not a lot of people knew about us. They didn't know what we were doing. And now that we've obviously gotten some more traction, a lot of word of mouth, and we've kind of got some momentum that way.
Right.
We're bringing in a lot more. Like we might see now like well over 1,000 people a year, and who will get multiple brain maps in a year as well. So that's another great thing too, because we have sampling of pre-conditions, post-conditions, and then kind of intermediary as well, right? So we can see like, okay, things are changing, and we can also go, okay, this issue seems to have resolved, and we just have these maybe other two things to work through. And so it's been phenomenal. And then we've also, as we've gone, like 2 years ago, we got the technology to be able to do SW Loretta, which can actually see deep into the brain, into structures that we've never been able to functionally map before. So as our technology gets more accessible and gets more resolution, we're able to see more as well. So
yeah, it's speaking firsthand. I've spent some time I've been in the program for probably, I don't know, 2 months now, and I've made massive improvements. But yeah, kind of like similar to you, I kind of went to the doctor. It's like they don't really tell you much. They're like, okay, I can give you some antidepressants, or I can do this and that for you, but there's really nothing. I went into my family doctor looking for a referral to like some kind of concussion specialist, and they're like, I don't really know what you're talking about. You're depressed. Here's some Zoloft. And that's what they were so quick to go to that. And that's kind of what I guess drew me to you guys, is you guys were actually, I think Chris told me about you guys, because he was looking into it too.
Yeah, I was looking into it, and I don't know if it was just happened to be the timing. Like you said, you've been around for 7 years.
Yeah, so Nirvana's been around since 2016.
Okay.
I've been in Calgary working in the field since 2014.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just poking around like Jared. I had gone and seen a doctor about, a couple of symptoms I was having, and, I just wanted to figure out what was going on. And they really didn't have much to offer other than, okay, I can send you over to do a little physio and this and that. And it was like, well, because I had told them, I said, I don't want to go on pills. I know that's sometimes the first resort for some doctors is to just, all right, let's try this pill. That didn't work. Try a different thing, kind of trial and error thing.
Yeah.
And I guess
not that they're all that way.
To be clear, like sometimes I think that's it probably helps some people. Right?
Yes, right.
But it's just like a blanket thing. You can just toss it at anyone.
Yeah.
It's essential, and because I do not want to take away from psychotropic meds, because they're very beneficial for a lot of people.
Right.
And it is essential to have some stability in the system, and that is technically what I'd prefer if people aren't at least having some stability. Right. Like you need to have some stability in the system before you can go in and start working through it. Right.
Yeah.
Especially if you're looking at trauma, and we're talking about like developmental trauma and complex PTSD. A lot of people need something like that. But the blanket standardized approach, it's obvious it doesn't work. I mean, our findings, the best performing psychotropic meds have a number needed to treat of 4, which means 4 people need to be treated for 1 person to get therapeutic effect. And that's the best performing meds. I mean, they're barely outperforming placebo.
Right.
So it needs to be looked at deeper. And when we measure therapeutic effect, a lot of times people will move from severe depression to moderate depression. Okay, definitely helped, but they obviously they want to feel better than that, right? So and that's where I was at as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're kind of like all three of us had a similar story of like, all right, we don't really accept what the doctors in medicine are giving us at the moment. So yeah, I was just looking online, and it was honestly a Google ad, like of all things, right? And just clicked on it and started going through the website and was like, wow, like when did this come out? Like this is game changing. Yeah. And, being friends with Jared for so long, and even our other friend Todd, like they've had concussion issues since they were, younger kids and everything like that. And, it was like, this is something different that they haven't gone through yet, that they haven't tried. And it was like, well, let's pass the info along and Jared's
Yeah.
been going now and seems to be
Yeah,
good.
big time. Like I look back to a few months ago, I don't even feel like I look at that and I don't even feel like that's the same reality. I'm like, okay, I'm living in like a different world now. But yeah, like I've gone through different treatments and that have helped before. Like I was going to Revelation Health Center before you guys, which is kind of like functional neurology, kind of like stimulating different parts of the brain through like different movements and doing different different exercises. But it definitely helped me, but I feel like for long term, like how you guys are so scientific and how you can actually see through the brain maps what kind of progress you're making, I feel like that is so helpful, because I feel like when you're really feeling like shit and then you get a little bit better, you're like, oh my God, I'm better. But you don't know how much better you can actually be because you've been living in this shithole for so long.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to rewind to something you said where you feel like you're living in a different reality. It's really interesting because when you get concussive injuries, almost ubiquitously will affect an area called the cerebellum. It sits right above the upper cervical region of the brain. It's very sensitive to any upper neck torsion or whiplash or anything like that. And what'll happen is you basically it starts not communicating properly with itself. And Chris, actually, maybe if you want to pop that image up.
Sure, yeah. You want to open the computer up there, Jared?
Yeah, there's a great image of the cerebellum on there. That's right. Yeah. So on the left side there, the kind of multicolored round region there, right underneath of that that's axial slice there. So that's the cerebellum, and it is responsible for timing the signals that are going through the brain. So if I need to say something, I need to pull the words that I know out of my explicit memory, drag them up to my Broca's area right here, and then form speech. That timing can get dropped. It's like a timing belt.
Right.
Like literally a timing belt that's timed wrong. In a car, you're not going to go very far, right? We're not going to go very fast. Go in there. So that when that gets affected, the really, really cool thing that that research came out about 2 years ago on is the cerebellum is the quantum computer of the brain. So when that cerebellum is misfunctioning, it is actually almost altering space-time on you.
Wow.
So when, for instance, astronaut in the ocean, this is what I felt, and I had massive cerebellar damage that was reversible, thankfully. But again, no one is looking at this. I mean, even neurologists, they're not running EEGs unless they think you have epilepsy.
Okay.
So they're not looking at this stuff. And we found these climbing fibers in the cerebellum are actually quantum. So if I were to give your brain a stimulus and measure the firing in the cerebellum, and then I gave it the same stimulus again, it would fire differently, because it would actually pick up on a pattern that's more efficient in order to process that information.
Yeah.
It's literally quantum computing.
Wow.
So by saying you feel like you're living in a different reality, I mean, that's accurate.
Yeah.
You are.
That's crazy.
That's pretty, wild to think about that little thing inside your brain that you have no idea that's even really there is doing all that, like literally bending time and space for you personally.
Wow.
Yeah. It's fat, man. The world of neuroscience
Yeah.
blows my mind.
Yeah, I'm sure there was lots of times you were sitting in the thousands of classes you've taken and just jaw dropped like, oh wow.
Yeah, you know what? It's most of the jaw dropping is like looking at complex cases at the clinic, and then all of a sudden running through research and being like, oh my God, this is what's happening. Like the brain is actually doing that. It's just and we don't give enough credit to our brain and even our mental focus and our mindset. Just like incredibly powerful, man. And that's the other thing that I don't like about pharmaceutical medicine past a certain point is it's completely disempowering. It's like, you're not going to be able to do this without this little external agent that I got to give you here, right?
Yeah.
So,
So how fragile, like you talk about the cerebellum being such a key component there, is that one of the more fragile components of the brain that's easily damaged, or do you have to, like you said, do a whiplash kind of thing to torque it in the right way?
Yeah, I mean the brain is fairly fragile, but the cool thing is it's malleable. So even if it were to be damaged, it's not like a glass vase or anything like that, right? Vase, depending on where you come from. It can be kind of formed almost like Play-Doh, right? Where if you have the right tools, you can actually form it back to a way where it's functioning properly again. But it is like the white matter, which is the wiring that runs through the brain. So actually the image that I'd shown previously, that's an image of a connectome on the right side. And the connectome, like most people are familiar with the genome. The genome is obviously our entire makeup of our genes, right?
Yeah.
The connectome is the entire fingerprint of the connectivity of the brain. Far more complex than the genome. It's the most complex thing in the universe, like that we know in the measurable universe is the brain, right? That connectome is fairly fragile. So when you hit your head, you get what's called a coup-counter-coup injury. So, say I'm driving in a car and I'm stopped at a red light and I get rear-ended. Yeah. The inertia of that causes my body to, move back very quickly, right? Because the car is going to go forward. I'm going to fly back into the seat, right? As that happens, my brain actually stays still and my skull moves. So the skull hits the front of the brain and then rebounds the brain to the back. Yeah. And that's called a coup-counter-coup injury. And when that happens, the wiring that you see that runs through the brain is very fragile to shearing. So it's kind of like, like open up wires in your wall and like pull them apart, right? That's kind of what can happen. Or, I sometimes describe it as like a mouse chewing through wires. Mm-hmm. You get short circuiting now. And some of that shearing damage, we've used 7 and 11 Tesla magnet in an MRI, which is like 2 to 3 times more power than what a typical MRI is. Okay. You can see these little lesions that happen. And so when that occurs, the brain, that's, as far as we know, there's nothing that repairs that right now. Okay. But the gray matter, everything surrounding it, can actually adapt to learn how to communicate again with the fact that it's like the road is blocked, but you just build a new one.
New detour.
Exactly. Like a earthquake hits and you have a fault and it's like, okay, well, we'll build around it. And the brain can do that if it's trained properly to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. The body's pretty amazing at healing itself like that. Just finding another way to still make it happen. It's pretty incredible. Like even when you talk about whether it's something like the brain, you're talking about that connectivity in the brain, or even a spine on somebody, right? Like they're getting closer and closer to be able to reconnect and like they show the rats with the stem cells reconnecting. It just makes this massive wires basically and reconnects everything itself. So the body's pretty impressive that it can, regenerate or find a different way to do something like that.
Well, and the paramount founding with that was the finding of glial cells. Which are basically the electricians or the power linemen of the brain. They play a role in immune function in the brain as well. Okay. So there's a lot of people have heard of like a synapse or a synaptic connection, right? And that's where our neurotransmitters get dumped. Neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and then they'll have an effect on the next neuron. Well, what not a lot of people know is there's actually a glial cell that oversees that. It's kind of regulating what's going on in that junction. So it's what's called a tripartite synapse, or a neuronal threesome, which is my favorite. But that glial cell can look at that and go, okay, this is what needs to happen. And so you look at the matter, the gray and the white matter, it can technically be repaired, but you have to give those glial cells the right information. So there's peptide therapy that I utilize a lot that is not being talked about nearly enough, called vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. VIP. Yeah. That's it. Okay. Yeah. Literally, when we have quantitative MRIs, because we take MRIs a lot too in circumstances where we think there's been some structural problems, right. But we let a computer analyze it. We don't let the human eye look at it because it's going to miss a lot of things. So a computer analyzes it, tells you how big basically every area in the brain is, if it's enlarged or if it's atrophied, which basically is a fancy term for a loss of connections. Okay. And VIP has been reversing this in like 90% of people, and it's phenomenal. Like the pre-post MRI images are just mind-blowing. So one thing that you'll see with concussion a lot, it's happened for myself as well, is there's a little area in the basal ganglia called the caudate nucleus. It stands for tail nucleus in Latin. And it is responsible for hitting the brakes on the brain.
Yeah.
So the overthinking, rumination, sleep problems, anxiety, OCD-like tendencies, constant nervousness, losing your train of thought, getting distracted because your brain's doing all this internalization all the time. That area gets affected a lot in concussion because of the inflammatory response that happens, causes atrophy. And even after the inflammatory response goes away, if nothing's there to tell that brain to regrow, it usually doesn't. So you can literally repair, like we didn't even think this was possible 10 years ago. You can repair these structural atrophies in the brain using an intranasal peptide.
Huh.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it, like you kind of need to do this, scientific research that you guys are doing. Like you said, not just taking the, we don't know answer. You're finding something out, and that's impressive. That something's like so this peptide stuff, is it like a difficult thing for people? Like, is it a prescription med that you got to get, or like you have to go see a doctor, or is it something that most people should be taking on a regular basis anyways? Like, or is it a very specific time and space where you need this?
Yeah, great question. It's a very specific time and space. It's not for everybody. It's not always effective. You also need pre and post testing to make sure that you're not there are things that it can flare, like it can actually flare inflammation. So you need to kind of have some pre-post testing for it.
Yeah.
And it's either by prescription or research based. Now in Canada, we're in a unique space for peptides where Health Canada doesn't know what the hell to do in terms of regulating these things. So there's a handful of peptides that are regulated. They have to be prescribed. They have to be dispensed by a pharmacy. But then there's a bunch of others that you can go to a research-based company, buy them, and use them personally. And, you want to do it responsibly.
Some risks to just putting stuff in your body for sure.
Keelan, our other co-host, who's on the road trucking today, he wants to start taking BP 157.
BPC 157. Yeah. And that's a really safe one.
It's like
typically
it's for more for your joints and your muscular tissue around.
It is. It's actually it's also really effective for repairing synapses in the brain as well. It repairs connective tissue. It also plays a role in histamine regulation. It plays a role in the gut permeability as well. So there's a phenomenon called leaky gut, which also can happen after concussion, that can prevent people from healing properly and can drive serotonin levels down. It can actually work as a repair that way, taking it orally. BPC 157 actually incredibly safe peptide. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
VIP, there's some side effects profiles you got to be careful with.
Yeah.
But yeah, the peptide game is it's amazing, man.
Yeah.
It's opening up a whole new revolution.
So just because I'm curious and I want a little background on you, and if you're willing to talk about it, that is. I mean, you said you had a lot of concussion issues throughout your teenage years and then going into school and med school or whatever. Were you doing sports or active? Like, what was going on in life that made you have these concussions going on?
Yeah, my mom just dropped me a lot.
The wooden paddle came out a few too many times.
I was a hockey player all my life. Up until I kind of started having problems in university. And then what really did me in, and I don't have any real hard proof of this, but was football.
Okay.
So I played running back at grade 11 and grade 12 in football. And I remember after the first few games, obviously I'm not a big guy, so I'm like half the time I'm blocking from my quarterback and blocking some big, defensive lineman, or I'm running the ball and I'm trying to gain an extra yard. So what do? You go head first, right? There wasn't a lot of awareness then about it, but I remember the first few games, first few weeks, I looked at my buddy and was like, man, like I feel like I'm on a boat. Like, is that normal? And he's like, oh yeah, man, like happens to me every game. And he'd been playing since like grade 8, right? I'm like, oh, okay, right. And again, no knowledge of this, no anything like that. But I know, like, when I got my upper cervical structure evaluated through X-ray and whatnot, I had massive rotations in my C2, massive problems with my cerebellum. And I mean, I know for sure, like, there's a couple times I got knocked out on the field.
Yeah.
And like, laying down with my mouth guards laying on my face, and I'm like, get up, and trainers above me, and I'm like, get off the field, sit 2 plays out, back out there again, right?
Yeah.
So, it's I'm lucky that I didn't have worse issues, but I think that was really the factor. And then, you get in a few scraps too. Drinking in high school. I know we had a pretty bad bout one time in Edmonton, and I got beat up pretty bad. And so there's just like all that stuff, and it's all additive, like these subconcussive and possibly undiagnosed, but actually concussive blows, right? They're just additive. They slowly but surely crash hormonal regulation. They crash immune regulation. They cause structural issues. They cause communication problems. And eventually, it's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. And, all of a sudden, you're not functioning like you could be.
Yeah. And that's kind of what, like, the brain map is showing you guys, is all those communication issues that you just talked about.
Communication issues, inflammation, glial cell signaling. If there's any signs of neurotransmitter dysregulation, you won't know the exact specifics of it, but you can go, we're dealing with an inflammatory problem here. We've got to look into that, right? And then you can run diagnostic lab testing and figure out how the immune system's behaving, what's causing it, if there's any hormone dysregulation. Growth hormone's a common one that drops low. And I know I had some problems with the hormone called DHEA. I had DHEA levels of a 50-year-old man when I was 20, and so like that was driving a ton of cognitive problems, energy problems, mood problems. And these are things that just aren't being assessed. But you look at the literature, there's like 176,000 published articles on steroid hormone dysregulation after concussion. Yet we don't see any of it in mainstream medicine.
And for sure I totally resonate with everything you're saying there, but this is kind of one of the reasons behind trying to start this podcast, bring more awareness to this kind of stuff, because especially in the motocross community, like when I was a kid, I would knock myself out. I wouldn't even know where I was parked, and I couldn't find my way back to my truck. And guess what? I'm going racing the next day, right? So I see that. I still see it, even though like there is more awareness around it, but people don't. I find in the motocross community, people are so invested. Like, it's such an investment to go. Say you're gonna go to Ontario for the national, and you're gonna pack up. You're gonna drive 36 hours across the country. You're gonna spend all this money, and little Johnny hits his head, and now he's saying he can't race, but Dad's like, what the hell? We just spent all this money. We spent all this time. You're going to get out there racing tomorrow. Like,
and physically you look okay.
Yeah. And
right?
it's not like a hard diagnostic thing you can do. Like, you go to the doctor, like, oh yeah, you hit your head. You're fine. Ran a CT scan. You're fine. There's no bleeding. Right. And they're like, oh yeah, you're fine. Let's go. Get back out there. And then this happened to me when I was a kid. I hit my head, knocked myself out. We went out to Ontario because my parents were already out there. I went out there to meet them, hit my head again, and I'm supposed to keep racing because we just spent all this money and all this time, and no fault of my parents or anything, but like we didn't know about this back in 2007.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah. I'm not saying it's their fault, but even myself, I'm like, what the hell? We just did all this to go and do this, and now I'm just pulling the plug because I hit my head and I don't feel right. Like, maybe I'm just being a bitch. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think this is so great, where you can actually I wish this was more accessible. Is what I really wish, right?
Yeah.
It would be great if you could go to a doctor or like a emergency room and they would just do this, and then you actually know, right?
Yeah, well, and I mean, we're working on something like that actually right now. I think we're really close to having this ready, where we'll be able to have headsets that people can have on hand, that, they can run a collection. Like, you guys could be out on the, on the track and be like, hey man, like, I had a bad wipeout, hit my head. I'm going to do a quick collection here. You'll want to take a look at it. And we can actually look at it from, virtually on our platform and go, ooh, yeah, man, like, you better take it easy.
Yeah. That's a game changer.
So you can see in the map a little bit of like current versus old, or is it all really hard to decipher?
Yeah, that's difficult because Like you're saying, like what was the recent head injury and what might have been an old one.
Yeah.
What was the baseline kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, that's difficult unless you know exactly the trajectory you hit your head on. Then we can kind of see. It's like, oh yeah, like I had somebody the other day that they got rear-ended, and it's interesting because you can almost tell when people have their heads turned when they get rear-ended.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was like, did you have your head turned to the left for some reason? And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah. Like actually, I dropped something, and so I was leaning down and I had my head
Yeah.
tilted to the left when
Wow.
I got hit.
Yeah.
And you can see that trajectory. So you can tell, like, if you know the trajectory, you can kind of pick out what was what.
Right.
But yeah, that's the importance of having even just a baseline as well, where it's like, hey, I just want to get a baseline of. I had a couple people actually last week that came. I was really happy that, like, no issues or anything, like no complaints. It was like, we just want a baseline. I'm like, great. Like, yeah, let's do that. And then we can see where we're at. And then if you were to hit your head, we can see, if you've digressed a lot.
That would be super important for any
huge.
athlete, especially in our sport, right? Like getting these kids a baseline as they're younger, and then
Well-
almost every year kind of rechecking up on that baseline.
Well, that's what they kind of half-ass do it in the States, where you
Oh,
take like
yeah.
so to get a pro license in the States, you have to take this baseline concussion test, and it's just basically a test of reaction time.
Yeah.
But guys will like butcher it all the time, just like go slower, just so they can.
Exactly.
It's easier to reach their baseline,
Yeah.
right? But this, if we could do this, and you could get like a baseline brain map, and then anytime you hit your head, but you can also hit your head during the week, right?
True.
But if you hit your
Yeah.
head at the races, this is what they do in the States. You hit your head at the races and you're concussed, they say, no, you can't race until you pass your baseline concussion test.
Yeah, exactly. And it has someone that is experienced in evaluating things,
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
at, there's something that's a red flag automatically called slowing in the EEG. And it's when the EEG rhythm slows down and you get these big slow waves that almost looks like the brain's asleep. That's like a red flag, like absolutely not. Plug is pulled, right? The other way around some of the testing, reaction time testing and processing speed, is doing something called an event-related potential. So you give the brain a stimulus, either visual or auditory, and you can actually pick up the timing like as soon as it becomes conscious. Because us three sitting here talking right now, we're actually not encoding consciously what each other is saying until 300 to 400 milliseconds after.
Right.
Our brain's doing all this low-level processing that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
We seem like it's instant, right? So you can actually pick up the timing and the amplitude of that signal, and you cannot cheat the system because you're literally just picking it up off brainwaves, right? So there's things like that too that are adaptable to more mobile applications as well. So we're also working on that.
Bringing it to light, and like you said, it's got to become in front of everybody's eyeballs for it to be the staple way.
Yeah. I guess the big problem with the whole thing is because people that haven't actually experienced the whole concussion and what it's like, they don't understand it, and like, why would I spend all this money trying to implement this program where we got to do this brain map, and they don't understand that it can ruin your whole life, really.
Great point.
Even from my experience, like I had hit my head a few times as a kid growing up racing in hockey and all kinds of things, and none of it really I didn't think it affected me until the last time I hit my head there. And then it was like, oh, wow, the world changed on that one, or I changed at least. And
straw that broke the camel's back.
Right?
That's it.
But like what Corey was saying earlier, he's like, all these subconcussive blows, like you're slowly lowering your baseline, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like until it gets to a certain point, you don't realize, like, especially after you just like a bunch of minor like. Okay, I just want to get on this quick. Crazy story. I was talking to a guy the other day at the track, and he's like, yeah, man, this guy, he crashed at the track, and we took him to the ER. He was out for like 4 or 5 minutes. He lost like 3 days. He doesn't remember 3 days of his life. And he gets to the ER. The doc's like, let me take a look at his helmet. Helmet looks fine. I think he's on drugs. This is what the doctor said at the Rocky View emergency.
Wow.
So this just goes back to the mainstream medicine, I guess, right?
Yeah, in Canada it's tough because we don't technically have public health. We have one single company that is subsidized, Alberta Health.
Yeah.
They're in the business of saving money, so they're very well protected. In the States, you don't see that very much because the lawsuits are insane, right? So you bring someone in the States and it's like, okay, we're going to do a full workup. We don't want to miss anything because we can't afford a big lawsuit, right?
Yeah.
In Canada, it's just like, no, I got in crap the last time I ordered an MRI when I didn't have a good reason for it. So I better not order one this time. And that's what it's come down to here, especially in Alberta, is like, let's order less testing and try to do our jobs the same.
I'm sure they do see the person come in looking for drugs too, right?
Totally.
It only takes one person to ruin it for everybody. Like one person goes in, asks for the drugs, they get it, and they go die, and now it's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
So
I
mean, I'm not. The doctor's in a tough situation, but at the same time,
it's not an ideal system to start with.
Yeah,
Right?
it's not the doctors.
Yeah,
it's not the doctors.
Right, yeah.
It is not the doctors. It's bigger than that. It's that the doctors are not given the tools that they need to do their job.
Yeah.
Either the tools or the training.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the problem's bigger than that. Yeah. These doctors are doing phenomenal jobs with what they have. But
the knowledge base you have to treat, a million different things that they see in a day. Well, sometimes you're going to revert to the last thing you saw, which was somebody coming in.
And that's the human condition, right? That's just it.
And that's where it's cool to see things like, the brain map and whatnot. It's scientific in front of your eyes. Like there's not really much lying about that unless you don't have faith in the technology, which I'm sure some people don't. But
of course, there's always ways to invalidate, especially something new and different. It's like, whoa, wait, no, this can't be.
Yeah. But to me, it's like super cool. Like I'm looking at what's on the screen there right now, and it's like how they can see that connective, connection going across the brain, like you said.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I was pretty blown away when I went in there from my first meeting with you after the first brain map, and I was like, you guys hit the nail on the head pretty, like, it was like, okay, this region's doing this, and that's why you withdraw, or this part of the brain is related to trauma. And I'm just like, wow, like this, it's almost empowering in a way, because it's almost like, okay, I'm not crazy. This is actually like there's hard science here to say like this is why these things are happening. I'm not just some kind of lunatic.
So I'm curious, what was the brain map experience like for you? Is it an uncomfortable experience? What are you wearing? What's going on when you're getting a brain map done? And Corey, you can touch on when he speaks there.
So it's not uncomfortable at all. You just basically, they put this cap on your head, and they have to I don't know, they have to like put a needle into your head, but they just put it in, I guess, to get. I just actually had one like a couple days ago. I just had my third brain map. But
so what we do is there's little metal discs in these electrodes. There's 19 different electrodes, and we just need to fill them with a little bit of an electric conductive gel, so we can connect the scalp to the electrode. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was I don't know, I was in a pretty dark place in my first one, so I was just like, anything that can help. I'm like, let's do it all. And that's what I kind of love about you guys' clinic too. It's not just like you can just go there, you have a phone call, and they're like, are you committed to this? Is this right for you? And I thought that was really cool. And then it's not like you're just getting the brain map and they're like, oh, here's all these, and then I meet with you, and there's all these supplements to start taking, and we do blood work, and there's all these hormone levels and everything. We got to like take care of the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's important. And like when we work with people too, that's my preferred method, because I always want to do things in the most efficient manner. I find that the longer we're feeling shitty, the more time is lost, and it's the only thing we have in this life. So to me, it's like, let's get on top of everything that we see here, and when we can figure that all out from the brain map, right? Some people, that's too overwhelming for them, and it's like, let's just do one thing at a time. And we can do that too, but it's definitely better to see all the moving parts. And I have actually a good YouTube series on downstream effects of concussion, because a lot of times when people are dealing with concussive issues that extend longer than a 3-month span, it's not just the concussion anymore. It's what the concussion caused.
Right.
So the concussion caused a hormone dysregulation, immune dysregulation, GI problems, upper cervical misalignment, cranial nerve dysfunction, whatever. So it's a lot of other things that can be triggered. So
Yeah.
I find that's the most effective method. And then you can provide people with a high level of predictability. And I find that's something that's really missing in the alternative. And I'm going to bash on the alternative medicine community now. Is they're in a lot of ways doing the same damn thing that's going on in mainstream media, where it's like, or mainstream medicine, where it's like, okay, well, you have these symptoms here, take these supplements. And it's like, okay, well, you don't know what's causing those symptoms. Like, it's great. It's like the safer version of like vitamins or herbs, but how can you tell this person that it's going to help them, right?
Yeah.
And so, really understanding what the causative factors are, and then helping people select the therapies that are right, because pharmaceuticals might be appropriate in certain situations to fix things, right? Natural, yeah, as well. But I find it offers a high level of predictability too. Like, we're pretty proud to say that we have over 90% predictability, where we can say with over 90% confidence that, you are going to feel better.
Wow.
Right? Whereas a lot of the times it's like, well, try this, see if it works, try that, see if it works, try that, throw everything at the wall and see if it works.
Well, you
It's
spend
like,
5 years trying different stuff, and you could probably go backwards doing a lot of it too, I would imagine.
totally, or just run in a circle,
Yep.
So
Yeah, crazy stuff.
That is, yeah. It's a lot to take in all at once, to be honest. 'Cause it's
it is.
It's hard to believe that the body can do some of this stuff. It's hard to believe that the technology can do some of this stuff now. But, like the coolest thing kind of listening to you talk there was like, you are looking at a bigger picture than just the brain. Like we're talking so much about the brain right now, but it sounds like you're looking at more than that. Like you might not be diagnosing somebody's gut issue or something like that, but like you said, it could be related to what's going on in the brain. So we need to see what's going on in the blood work, what's going on in this and the map and the blood. I don't know all the steps. Of course, I sound like an idiot talking here.
Yeah,
but you're good. You're
so
good.
yeah, I mean, basically, you get this cap put on your head, and we just are literally collecting passive electrical activity. Like as the brain functions, it produces electrical impulses. And you can pull those off the brain and then run it through all these different quantifications to figure out how it's engaging, how it's connecting, how it's communicating, what power it's expressing. I do a review of that, and then I sit down, like I did with Jared. I go through medical history. I go through the brain maps. I basically go, okay, based on history, brain map, symptoms, here's what I think's going on. Yep. Here's where we should kind of look a little deeper, and here's where we can actually start doing some work. And that's kind of the process. And then we're remapping. At first we remap every month, and then we spread it out as we go. Like, a lot of times most of the issues are worked out within 3 to 6 months. And then we're just kind of, just kind of assessing and making sure things are staying stable. And there's a lot of different permutations just depending on what's going on, but
Interesting. And like, how many times do you have somebody come in and they're talking and, they think they got post-concussion symptoms or, something of that sorts, and you find something else? Does that happen frequently where there's actually you didn't, maybe the hit to your head didn't do it, but here's this thing going on over here, let's dive deeper into that?
Totally. I see it quite often. You'll oftentimes see developmental trauma, complex PTSD, some more emotional psychological injuries, which injure the brain in different ways,
right?
Which is, again, you can differentially diagnose it with quantitative EEG, which is incredible. And people like this need certain types of therapy, right? Like there are things like vitamins, diet, nutrition, peptides. They're not going to do anything for anybody with trauma. Like that is not the way that you work with that, right? So that's a common one. In some cases, I've seen some people. This is phenomenal. This is amazing how many people are affected by this. Water damage building exposure. Then they get a concussion. Then they can't heal from the concussion. Countless cases of this. Like I'd say probably 30% of my post-concussive cases.
So like mold.
Sorry, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I literally just did a podcast on this yesterday on mold, not just mold, but microbes and water damage buildings in general. In Canada and in the United States, we do not actually, we haven't put in place the medical consensus standard on a water damaged building. So about 24% of the population is affected when they go into buildings that are technically cleared environmentally, but they're not good enough for people that are genetically susceptible.
Wow.
And so the way that it activates the innate immune system is almost the exact same as to how a concussion can activate the innate immune system. So you get a compounding effect. And then so if the concussion was what blew the lid off the tank, then and they're still being exposed to something, they stay stuck and they can't get better. And so this we've learned through gene expression testing, which is friggin' phenomenal, where we can analyze the behavior of a white blood cell. But even our brain map data now has been able to show us that a little better as well. So there are things that, like, again, people just are not realizing, what's happening because their bodies deal. Like, again, it's like, if I'm not sick, I'm healthy. Right. It's like, well, no, that's not true. Right. But that's how our system thinks. So if I feel good, then I'm healthy, right? I can keep drinking all the beer I want, eating all the Doritos I want. I'll hit McDonald's and A&W a couple times this week. Jeez. And I'll skip a few workouts. I'm feeling fine. And it's like, no, that is not the definition of health, right?
Yeah.
And so we just, these are the things that we aren't aware of. And like I say, like, Canada hasn't even integrated the medical consensus standard put in place by the World Health Organization in 2009 because and simply because of insurance company influence. I'm fine to say that because that's what it is.
Well, there's a lot of harsh realities to the world that need to be said, right?
Yeah.
Like, not everything's all rosy out there.
That's
just
right.
because we live in Canada. But that is actually quite mind-blowing to me that I've never heard that before. Never heard even a rumbling of that or come across something like that.
Yeah.
So is that something new that you guys have found, or has that been out for a while?
It's I mean, for us, we've had it on our radar for probably about 3 years.
Yeah.
There's been some research since about 2016. So there's something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is an inflammatory response that gets turned on by something external. And because of how it affects the peptide regulation in the area called the hypothalamus in the brain, it's the little gland that runs the show of the entire body.
Right.
What happens is we can't regulate inflammation after that. So inflammation gets stuck on, and even though the concussion's long behind us, we can't get inflammation regulated. And this is one thing that, like, VIP peptide has been really helping people with. And water damage building exposure can do the same thing. The newest kid on the block is COVID. So post-COVID syndrome is really a fancy form of CIRS, of chronic inflammatory response syndrome.
Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Obviously it's so new that, I don't know much about it, but that's pretty wild.
Yeah, we have some good, there's some good data sets on it now, on post-COVID, and we've seen, I think we're probably close to 40 cases of it now since the beginning, and it's pretty much, it's just that, right? And so when
you're talking about sorry to cut you off.
Good.
When you're talking about inflammation from the water damage or post concussion or COVID here, is this visible inflammation you'll see and feel in, like, areas of your body, or this is just stuff tucked away that you're gonna feel off about but not necessarily gonna catch on to?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and I think that's kind of traditionally we understand inflammation as, like, I have, like, inflammation in my knee. I'm, like, arthritic, right?
Yeah.
So no, there's all sorts of different types of inflammation. The type I'm talking about is basically the immune system dysfunctioning to just a really low degree where it turns this chronic inflammatory response on. And it's very hard to detect. Like, you look at Alberta Health Labs white blood cell levels, C-reactive protein levels, and most people come up normal. But you have to just dig a little more deeply, look at some specialized immune markers, and all of a sudden you go, oh, look at this. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm seeing in the brain map, right?
Huh.
So it's inflammation can be subtle.
Yep.
It doesn't need to be acute. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to cause joint pain.
Yeah.
It frequently causes headaches. But it can cause all sorts of things. It can even just cause dopamine to be completely dysregulated.
Huh.
We had a guy one time that had inflammation was driving what looked like a PTSD bipolar response. I've seen schizophrenics that it's literally inflammatory issues completely crashing their dopamine.
Yeah.
And then other schizophrenics doing the opposite, where their dopamine levels are going through the roof. Those are the people that typically respond better to therapy, but the inflammation has effects across hormone systems, neurotransmitter systems, you name it. So it's the most common subtype, actually.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, it's crazy too how like all the stuff that happens in the brain can affect all your hormone levels and like all your like everything in your body, really.
Yeah. There's a bilateral axis, right? Like you have the brain talking to the gut talking to the brain.
Yeah.
You have the brain talking to the adrenal glands talking to the brain, and so there's these bilateral loops everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's how we look at the brain too, and how we can decipher activity coming from lower areas of the brain to surface areas. Is through phase locking and phase loops, and and then we're interacting with the environment, right? Like the lights above us right now are affecting our circadian rhythm, which affects our immune system regulation, hormone regulation. It's all these things that we just have people never even really think of.
Right.
And all this is, again, all research based too. Like this isn't something that I'm just like,
you just decided to come up with it
Hogwarts
yesterday.
Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry or anything like this. This is hard science.
Yeah.
So.
Oh man. I mean, looking up like all the accolades to your name there and all the things you've done, it's like, how have you had time in your life to do all? It's like, first of all, I don't understand half of it, just goes straight over my head, and then even a couple of them that I can make out, it's like, wow, like Jared said at the start of the show, this might be the smartest guy we've ever talked to on here.
No doubt.
I think when you get inspired by something, and you have a fire under you, it's just it's hard to shut it off, right? Yeah. I found now kind of settling in a little bit more and realizing that, seeing the holes of what the gaps we need to be filling. Yeah. It's kind of changed my course a little bit. I'm not so interested in getting as many certifications anymore, but I think I was just inspired. Like this was so exciting. It was funny because when I originally discovered it all, talking to people about it, they're like, what? Like, you're weird, man. Like, I don't know what you're going on about, but now it's like, people come to me for advice all the time, because it's like, and for me, it's like, I'm inspired to now, like, I got better. I continue improving my health as much as I can, but it's also like, now I feel like I have a bit of a duty to spread the knowledge, right?
Well, and it's really cool to know that, like, you kind of went through it, and right? You're not just a doctor who is just looking at the piece of paper and just has a client who's got a concussion. You felt it when he says he's disconnected from the world. You felt disconnected from the world when he says he's feeling better because of the peptide treatment. You've gone through that, or I don't know if you went through that, but like you've experienced this yourself, so it's reassuring as a client, I'm sure, to know that like this isn't just somebody running me as a guinea pig right now. This is something he's done to himself, and his other coworkers have possibly gone through some of this testing and stuff as well, I'm sure.
Well, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed, validated research on pretty, like, we don't do anything that doesn't at least have some research backing it. Obviously there's some cases where you're like, man, like, you're not really moving as we should, and it's like there's a bit of research on this thing over here, like, haven't done it before, but are you game to try it? Like, and that's the other nice thing that we can offer is something like people can kind of sign off and be like, yeah, you know what, nothing else is working, but if you're giving me this direction, you're giving me this other outlet, this other signal of hope, and so that's the other nice thing about the world we're in is there's a lot of things out there, right? And so we're constantly perfecting our model, obviously, but
that's really cool.
I feel like that's something that like the mainstream medicine's kind of lacking, is right, they're kind of like stuck in what they know, and they're not really willing to I'm speaking from, I obviously don't know 100%, but it seems like they're not willing to branch out and take chances on different things, which is kind of cool, which you guys are kind of free to do that.
Exactly. And I think everybody should have that freedom. Like, I think we should have freedom to make medical choices and choices for our health and evaluate the advantages and disadvantages. And we're not always going to have all the data. But if something looks preliminarily safe. It's been used in humans. It looks safe. You know, the side effect profile is not that bad. You know, if you're suffering, I think you should have that option, right?
Yeah. Well, especially for, you know, like when you've tried all these other things and nothing's working. Like you hear this over and over again. Nothing works for people. Nothing works. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, unless you tell me it's going to kill me, well, you know, it maybe gives you a headache or some diarrhea. I'm like, sure, all right, whatever. I can live with it. Let's give it a go to get your quality of life back. Like, how many people are out there suffering, have no quality of life anymore just because of something that could potentially be fixed?
Probably a lot more than you think, too,
like you said, 90%. You have a 90% kind of
greater than 90% predictability, which again is phenomenal,
it's
right?
Unbelievable,
So we, like I say, we don't stray too much from our model because, you know, we're hitting good percentages there, but you know, in some cases we still are going to help that, you know, 9% of people that it's like they're not meeting they're not getting where they want to be. You know, most people are going to at least get improvement, but they're not getting to that point where they're really feeling like they're back. And you know, that's we have some flexibility there, right? Where it's like, hey, or it's like, hey, we'll connect with this clinic in the States and like they're doing this, and you know, that I think this is something that might work. And you know, I think that's what it's about, because I mean, you could wait around for 20 years to have 20 years of data on it and then be like, okay, now I'm comfortable, right? But you know, I think times are changing a lot. Like, I mean, we just launched the fastest approval on a vaccine ever. Right. And it's like, we don't have a lot of long-term data on that, but we got probably about 80% of the population.
Mass data.
Totally. Right. And so like, we don't have the longitudinal data to say, you know, what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years, but we got enough people that are like, you know what, if this is going to help, I'm going to weigh my odds here, right? Like, what's the risk benefit? And that's always the decisions that need to be made in medicine.
Well, that's the decision you have to make with any medical procedure, any medicine, anything. There's a risk to everything. There's a risk to going under to get your wisdom teeth taken out.
That's right.
You can die getting your wisdom teeth taken out. You know, like it's happened before. Is it going to happen every time? No. Right. They should know what they're doing by now. But
exactly.
Freak things happen, and everybody's so different. They, you know, react to things so differently. And
it's about being given informed consent of, you know, here's the research we have, and just being upfront about it, right? And we've seen people get just phenomenal effects too. Like one really cool thing, there's a subtype that we've had difficulties with. That happens in the thalamus, which is kind of the deep central region. It's like the microprocessor of the brain. When it gets hijacked by what's called the limbic system, which is our emotional survival system, it's very treatment resistant, both medication, neurofeedback, almost anything you try to use. However, ketamine seems to flip the switch on it. So IV ketamine, again, actually, you know, some pretty good preliminary data on it. A lot of people using it in the States. There's a few clinics in Calgary now. Treatment-resistant depression, ketamine, just flipping the switch. Incredible, right? And this is where psychedelics come in. You talked about altered reality, right? It's like sometimes you just need that other perspective, that other angle. But for whatever reason, we don't fully understand it yet. But again, to me, it's like, okay, you know, if you've tried everything and your life is hell, and you can go do a few ketamine IVs and you feel like a different person, awesome, right? And that's, again, like something, and so, you know, we help people down that road as well, where it's like, hey, what's your best option at this point? You know, what's the least risky, you know, best cost benefit scenario, and then we can work down from there. You know, if things aren't working there's lots of other options out there, but
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually one of my questions I was kind of scared to ask you about, is the psychedelic therapy. I'm not talking about buying acid off the internet and going out in the woods and taking a bunch of acid, but there is lots of new research coming out about like the psychedelic with psilocybin or ketamine or MDMA for PTSD and stuff like that. There's tons of new stuff about that, but a lot of people are scared to talk about it or maybe resistant to the idea.
Yeah. There's the newest one, which I'm excited about, is DMT, actually. Lot more approval on research in that terrain, which is exciting. We got the chance to review some preliminary data from a DMT trial And I was blown away by how it worked in the brain.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, all of those, they just have that ability to alter your perspective. But I think it's all about the intention, right? Like, you know, if it's like, oh, I'm gonna go do some acid and MDMA and get fucked up, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're not really being guided properly. You're not getting into like the right state for it to be therapeutic. And I think it's really cool that that's happening, because it's gonna really help shift the world of mental health, because it's like, okay, yeah, so there's this street drug, but we can get like a really pure, safe version of it, and we can sit in a therapy session, and we can go, hey, what's coming up for you, right? And if you start freaking out a little, it can be like, hey, it's okay, this is what's happening in your brain, right? Like it's all good. Like, just, you know, you can just be the awareness behind all that weird stuff that's going on. Get back in your body, regulate, right? And there's just so many. It's a laundry list of positive effects that come from challenging the brain on that level. You know, I describe it. It's like dipping your, you know, spiritual, emotional brain into a cold bath of water, right? It's like this like healthy stressor, where it's like, hey, sometimes it's healthy to get another perspective, right? Like, although we don't like to hear it from other people, you know, all
especially
the time.
from yourself.
right. Like, hey man, you should look at this. And I think that's where it's really showing positive effect is this hormetic like curve of just stress, right? Where it's like we're stressing the body, but not to the point of breaking it. Right. Just enough. It's like exercise, right? Or like I say, like if I do a cold bath and empty and deep freeze I have in my backyard every day, so I'm like so pumped about winter now coming again. But you know, these things where we can actually increase our window of tolerance, and that will actually translate to every other stressor in your life and your body, because the brain does not know the difference between an inflammatory stressor, a work stressor, a marital stressor, a temperature stressor. It doesn't know that. All it knows is it's a stress. And it triggers the same response. So if you can exercise that, or, you know, psychedelics, you can exercise that stress response and be okay and regulate in it, you just strengthened your window of tolerance. So now your body can tolerate more. And so the way that we work is we help build that window of tolerance bigger, so that people aren't going outside of that so quickly.
Right.
And then we also help remove things that are actually affecting the essentially affecting the window of tolerance and filling that window of tolerance up. So we're reducing that while, you know, teaching people how they can expand that. Yeah.
Huh.
Wild stuff.
It is wild.
Crazy.
It's like, it's hard to sit here and take it all in and actually feed a conversation, because I'm like, I want to process it all and like decompress it, and or I don't know if decompress it, right? You know, like run it through my brain and
process it.
Process it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you have a deep freeze with in your backyard?
Yeah.
Like, actually, I thought about doing it, like lining it and filling it up with water and putting it on a timer, so it goes on like half an hour every day or whatever, just to keep it at the right temperature.
That's deadly. And now, like, with winter coming, you know, like I had ice in mine yesterday. Just flip the lid open, let the weather deal with it. I mean, it's incredible for, again, increasing window of tolerance, right? Because you literally, your body, like, at first thinks it's gonna die, especially when it's literally 0 degrees water, right? Your skin starts hurting, right? So you kind of have to breathe through that. And it's really cool because you can literally get to the point where you relax. And you even start feeling a counter heat response coming up. And again, like, window of tolerance increasing is just one effect. Like, you get mitochondrial improvements. So you'll be able to, your mitochondria, which are the power plants of the cell, will start dividing like crazy. So you have way more of them to produce energy for you. You regulate dopamine and leptin. So I always tell, actually, you know, up at these latitudes, we have a light deficiency problem that we call seasonal affective disorder. And it's due to leptin levels not being able to increase enough in the winter because we don't get enough light exposure. And the antidote is cold. So fascinating. Nature literally gives us the solution, where it's like, you just got to get out and get cold.
No
wow,
way.
that's crazy. Actually, I never thought of that.
And
all this time we spend inside trying to be warm, you just get the hell outside.
Exactly. So everyone gets sad, sick, and tired right around this time. Actually, you're gonna start seeing it here in the next month or so. People are gonna start getting sick. They're gonna get sad. They're gonna get tired. all dopamine and leptin and immune driven, and it can all be mitigated by cold exposure.
Wow. Yeah. No, I actually have been doing like kind of a deep dive on like dopamine, and I listen to a lot of my favorite podcast is the Huberman Lab podcast.
Excellent.
Awesome. Like I just listened to one on, I think I showed it to you a few months ago or a month ago, the one on depression, like diving into like all the serotonin and dopamine and how all that stuff all works. Then I just listened to one the other day about dopamine, and it said there was a study that said that it wouldn't spike your dopamine being in cold water, but it would give you like a nice linear dopamine, like nice, and it'd go up above baseline and stay there for longer than most places, right?
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas opposed to drugs and short-term rewards, it's a spike and then a drop and a withdrawal. And yeah, the reason for that is it also helps elevate dopamine receptors. So you have dopamine's the signal and the receptor is the antenna, right? And so you need both working in concert. If you're giving yourself short-term bursts of reward, you'll actually reduce the amount of receptors, so you don't have anything to receive the signal. And the same thing happens with leptin and why people they don't burn energy well in the winter. And so by doing cold exposure, you're bringing the receptors up and the levels of dopamine. And so they're kind of working as a team that way, and your body's not, your neurons aren't going, oh my God, we have too much dopamine, we got to stop expression of receptors. It actually keeps it solid. And it plays a role in circadian rhythm as well. Because if you have a temperature increase that starts around 3 to 4 a.m. and you a temperature peak around a temperature minimum around 3 or 4 a.m.
Okay.
And then you start increasing your body temperature, and when it hits a point, you wake up. If you can spike that and increase the slope of that, you actually get a better, more profound energy profile throughout the day, and it will actually come down more quickly at night, so you'll actually fall asleep and sleep better. So to spike your temperature, get yourself cold, because the rebound effect when you dunk your body in cold water, the rebound effect will be your body will want to heat itself up.
Yeah.
So you get this quicker spike up to peak temperature, which happens kind of later afternoon, and then it starts coming down again. And it's really important that we do that, because we need to time the signals coming into our brain to tell it what time of day it is. So we have these clocks of our brain called circadian biology.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe touch a little bit on that circadian rhythm and stuff for people who don't know about it.
Yeah, so circadian rhythm, simply speaking, is when do we wake up, when do we sleep, when do we eat, when do we create energy, when do we reproduce? So the circadian rhythm actually runs, if we removed all light, all food, all stimulus, it would actually be a little greater than 24 hours. So if I put you into a dark room and deprived you of everything for 2 weeks, you'd actually think that it was daytime when it was nighttime. Mm-hmm. So your circadian rhythm would slowly get pushed forward. So we need this external stimulation to basically calibrate it, right? So light calibrates our circadian clock. So if we don't wake up until 11 a.m., guess what? Our circadian clock thinks it's earlier in the day, and then all of a sudden we're not getting light exposure for as long. And then we end up staying up late, and our whole circadian rhythm gets pushed. So by getting light exposure in the morning, getting bright lights off at night when the sun's down, and getting cold in the morning, hot at night, and then eating first thing in the morning and not too late at night, all those things, there's basically 3 different clocks that'll tell us what time of day it is. So the brain knows when to inflame. Right, we don't want the brain inflaming during the day. Yeah. Right, we don't want it going to sleep during the day either. We're gonna be tired all the time, right? And then we can't sleep at night. So yeah, these are all really important aspects, and even actually your macronutrient profile of when you eat what macros is important, because if you eat a heavy carb meal in the morning, standard American breakfast, you're gonna actually push your circadian rhythm forward. It's gonna think that it's later in the day than it actually is. Okay. So the enteric nervous system, or the nervous system of the gut, plays a role in telling the brain what time of day it is as well. So same thing, if you eat a whole bag of potato chips at 11 p.m., guess what? Your brain thinks it's earlier in the day than it is. Huh. So even if you do fall asleep, you're not going to have a deep restful sleep. You're going to wake up in the morning and your brain's going to want to keep inflaming. So yeah, all that.
I hope people are listening to that. You know, that would be a big change for a lot of people in just their general life, you know.
Big time. That's what I started doing, like the low carb breakfast thing, and like 4 or 5 years ago, and I found that really helps.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, really, really important. The elevated proteins and fats in the morning, it basically prime the system to build neurotransmitters and hormones, because they're like hormones, steroid hormones particularly, are built from cholesterol. Neurotransmitters are built from protein. So they're kicking it off, right? It's like, okay, we're building all this stuff that we're going to get the day done with, right?
Yeah.
And then your carbs are what sustain the energy, ATP energy production later in the day.
Okay.
But if you started off that way, you don't have any framework for everything to work and signal properly.
Yeah.
So you can get in trouble. And it's the same thing with intermittent fasting. People skipping breakfast all the time, it catches up to them.
Yeah.
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 I've always kind of wondered about that with the intermittent fasting. Was like, sure, it may be doing some result for them that they feel is positive, but is that long term positive?
Right. And the sustainability is in question. That
Yeah.
absolutely. So you can get away with it, and it's actually really helpful depending on what you're dealing with too. Like if you're if you're diabetic or you have insulin resistance and you're overweight, it doesn't really matter when you're intermittent fast. It's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
And you can do like even 1, 2, 3 day fasts. Going to be helpful. A guy like me that can't afford to lose much weight, I can't do that, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing too, if you keep doing that, you'll disrupt your circadian rhythm. You can do it a couple days a week, you're okay.
Yeah.
But if you get in the habit of it, and I find most people, they're doing it because it's like, okay, I heard intermittent fasting was good, and I hate the fact that I have to make breakfast in the morning, so I'll just skip breakfast,
Yeah.
and then I'll buy lunch, and then I'm
Yeah.
good to go, right? And it's like, if you're gonna skip a meal, skip dinner. That's like, I tell people, like, eat from like 8 to 4.
Right.
If you're gonna do a good solid intermittent fast, or like 7 to 3, eat breakfast, eat lunch, and then eat a small dinner that's like later afternoon.
Yeah.
That's the best way to do it.
what about like doing the butter coffee MCT?
Yeah, so that's better. Coffee on its own in the morning on an empty stomach is terrible for blood sugar regulation.
Yeah.
And if you want to prove me wrong, wear a glucose meter, a 24-hour glucose meter, and see if it's the case. But I'll guarantee you your blood sugar will be all over the place for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you mix fats in with coffee, it stabilizes it. And again, because it's driving healthy cholesterol, which can be made into steroid hormones that you're caffeine stimulating, right? So yeah, you don't want to be drinking just coffee. But if you mix it with MCT or the grass-fed butter, like your bulletproof coffee,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Better.
So that's better, definitely.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Anyways, I gotta pee. Can we take a quick
We
break?
can take a break.
Yeah, I do too. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Whiskey. That's a good name.
He's pretty stupid.
He's pretty
He's so
He is
stupid.
the dumbest puppy. He just fell off the couch. I don't know if you heard that
You need
last
this?
day. Whiskey, come on, upstairs.
Corey's drinking all your gluten-free beers.
These are awesome.
You like them? Are you
Yeah.
also gluten-free?
Well,
Sometimes.
I mean, I tried them.
Try and stay
Yeah.
Oh, I don't like those. So
You
that's,
don't?
No,
Oh,
I'm not really a beer drinker.
You know what?
though.
They taste like they're made from sorghum.
I
might
think
be actually-
they are,
they
and I
actually
don't
might
like
be.
the sorghum ones.
Oh no, they're rice and buckwheat.
Huh.
All right.
Maybe I would like that one then.
Yeah.
I like them with clamato juice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way.
Fair.
Yeah.
You must
Yeah.
be Dominique.
I am.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I actually was there today. I saw you.
That's
Yeah.
Dr. Smith was
Oh.
actually saying.
Well,
She's
yeah.
like, I heard you're doing a podcast
Yeah.
tonight. I was like, okay.
Pack it up, pack it in, let me begin. I came to win, battle me, that's a sin. Won't never slack up, punk, you better back up. Try and play the role, yo, the whole crew will act up. Get up, stand up, come on, throw your hand up. You got the feeling, jump up, touch the ceiling. Mugs, let the funk flow, someone talk junk, yo, bust him in his eye. Take that punk's whole feeling, funky, amps in the trunk, and got more rhymes than this cops at a donkey. Donut shop, sure enough, I got prop from the kids on the hill, plus my mom and my pop. I came to get down, so get out your seat, everybody, jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. From town to town, from bed to bed. It's like I said, we jump around. Everybody jump around. I'll serve your ass like John McEnroe. If your girl step up, I'll still smack that hoe. Word to your mom, I came to drop bomb. Got more rhyme than the Bible got Psalm. Just like the prodigal son, I've returned. Anyone stepping to me, they getting burned. See, cause I got lyrics, but you ain't got none. If you come to battle, bring a shotgun. If you do, you're a fool, cause you know I do to the death. Step to me and take your last breath. I got the skill, come get your fill. Cause when I shoot the gift, I shoot the kill. I came to get down, I came to get down. So get out your seat, everybody, jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. From town to town, from bed to bed. It's like I said, we jump around. Everybody jump around. I'm the cream of the crop, I rise to the top. I never eat a pig, less a pig is a cop. Better yet a Terminator, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Trying to play me out like as if my name was Sega. But I ain't going now, like no punk bitch. Get used to one style, I might switch it up around. Buck, get down, put out your head. Then you wake up in the dawn of the dead. Coming to get ya, coming to get ya. Spitting out lyrics, homie, I'll wet ya. I came to get down, came to get down. So get out your seat, everybody, jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. Everybody jump around. From town to town, from bed to bed. It's like I said, we jump around. Everybody jump around.
We were houseboating from my bachelor. All right, welcome back to the pod. We just took a quick pee break. We're good to go now again for another 3 or 4 hours. I feel like we could. This one's it's already been like what, an hour and a half.
Yeah, close to it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, 122. We're
Just
at
been
122.
breezing by. Let's
Yeah.
keep digging into it. So I don't know. I had a question, but I got so many. I feel like I have so many questions that I can't pinpoint one. But I guess one question I had prior to coming into this podcast is like, how much more detrimental it is it for a child to hit their head or have concussions? Because I feel like I had a lot of concussions when I was like 9 or 10. A lot of my PTSD comes back to that, and like how much worse is that than or like an adult hitting their head?
Right. So, I mean, typically, this is kind of it's a tough one because it depends on the severity and when intervention's given. So, in a child brain, they're more malleable. So there's more connections. Actually, as a child, as you're developing, this always kind of blows people's minds. We're actually losing connections as we develop, right? And the reason why we kind of get better and more refined at things is because we're pruning out or clipping connections that aren't useful, right? Which is why it's always easier to learn a second language when you're 12 or under than it is to try to learn it later on, because you've pruned a lot of synapses that you normally would have to use for flexibility in language away. So as a kid, technically, because you have a lot more options for, functional connectivity in the brain, technically, you get a head injury, it should be less detrimental. The problem becomes when intervention's not given appropriately or is not timed properly. So, you hit your head and say, your frontal lobe completely disconnects. Not completely, but, it reduces connectivity. And then nothing's ever done about it. That is when you get problems, right? But when I see kids that come in with concussion, I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's a home run. Like we're gonna be absolutely able to get things back on track.
Yeah.
But yeah, that problem is that when that happens, and then the brain just kind of the brain's as smart as we are, the brain's pretty lazy and it's pretty stupid. Which maybe makes sense for some people. I don't know, but it only does what's energetically favorable. So it won't go back to baseline. It won't go, because it's too hard, right? It's like, it's easier. This is actually the easier way now.
Yeah.
So we're going to go the easier, most energy efficient way. It won't, unless you actually push it to retrain it, it won't go back to that baseline, right? It will just go the most energetically favorable route. So if the energetically favorable route is to reduce connections in the frontal lobe, well, then you're at risk for addictive tendencies. You're at risk for anxiety. You're at risk for depression. You're at risk for learning disabilities, executive function disorders like ADD. And then so you let that go on too long, then it gets a little harder to fix, right? So in that case, it's kind of in some cases, it's better to hit your head as a kid. In other cases, it's not. As an adult, you hit your head, you don't have as many connections that you can, make and reform. But you also have a lot of, characteristics and things and personality and regulation and frontal lobe developed already.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends, where you hit your head as well. So, it's not really favorable to hit your head at any time. But it also, to me, it doesn't matter whether you're a child or adult. It's just like quick intervention's the most important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually an interesting analogy you made there. But I mean, I guess the problem for us is there was none of this happening when we were kids, right? So there was no intervention. It's just like, but I guess you're fine, right?
Moving forward, let's say you have a kid and
for sure.
They hit their head. Are you gonna go straight to Corey, or are you gonna go?
I'm gonna take him.
Put him back on the track.
I'm gonna take him to the ER, and they're gonna give him drugs.
Yeah.
But,
no, you're gonna.
Yeah, exactly.
ER first always.
Yes.
Yeah. No, make sure there's no bleeding.
Make
sure there's no bleeding.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And then you a QEEG by far is next best step.
Yeah.
But so I mean that's a great question, because there's a lot to think about with that one. But it's the one thing I will say, doesn't matter where you are, whether you hit your head as a kid or as an adult, whether you didn't get therapy or intervention or treatment for a long time, there's still something that can be done about it.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think that's important to understand, is it's never too late.
Yeah, that's a
It's
good point.
never ever
okay.
too late.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a
never
good
too
point.
late,
Yeah.
eh?
Do you ever see anything like this coming to the mainstream medical industry? Like, you say you go hit your head and then you get a CT and then you say, okay, there's no bleeding, we're gonna do it like EEG or whatever. Do you ever see that happening?
Yeah, we're gonna make it happen.
Sweet,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
We just actually are launching our United States locations right now, mainly because there's more open-mindedness down there. There's more funding for research, and yeah, we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna team up with doctors, PhDs.
Yeah.
We're gonna make it happen. Yeah, because the research is there. It's about now people going, this needs to be
Yeah,
frontline.
it does.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
really does.
Like
Like,
this.
There's a big knowledge gap that needs to be bridged, but we're gonna do it. That's what's gonna happen. So it's gonna start with internal systems with our clinics,
yeah.
and then it's gonna be influencing the bigger organizations.
Oh,
Yeah.
like, that was the first thing I thought. I was like, man, this is game changing. Like, it really is. This needs to be dispersed to the whole world, and all the medical professionals know about
Yeah.
how to utilize this and the benefits from it.
Absolutely, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm in the process of building a training program right now, and I'm gonna be bringing on some residents soon, and yeah, we're gonna be doing it. So I think it's gonna happen fast, and then
It's cool.
we're gonna strike up a partnership actually with Neurosity. They built actually might be cool to bring up their
Yeah.
device, because they've developed a device that I think is right now on the market the best mobile EEG there is, and they have a back end platform that will be able to analyze activity. So this is like here, I'll just get it pulled up here.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
Not wrecking things.
No,
No,
you're
you're
good. You're
good.
good to go.
Yeah. Like, so when you say like, or I'll let you bring that up first before I talk to you.
Yeah, there you go. You can fire that up.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So this is something.
So it's an 8-channel EEG unit. It's the best wearable on the market right now. In terms of something that's affordable,
Right.
right? Like we have ones like this that are 19-channel units, but they run like 30 to 40,000 US.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh
It's
yeah.
I think these guys have done a good job. Gotten into actually one of the CEO, Alex, is great. He's like literally answers my text within like an hour.
Yeah.
They've developed I think it's 700 US to buy. But you can literally monitor your EEG activity, anything you're doing, unless you had to
Yeah.
wear a helmet or whatnot.
Yeah.
And we can actually pick that up and run it through back end software to analyze it. And
Yeah.
then we can even go a step forward and put in neurofeedback protocols for it too. So, we're looking at developing an app
Cool.
that works with this actually to be able to, like hopefully we'll just be able to train an AI that can go like, thumbs up, thumbs down. You got a
Yeah.
head injury,
Yeah.
you're good, or no, you're not.
Or like
right?
we were talking
Something
about
simple.
earlier, like you get your baseline test, and then every weekend or after a head hit, you put this thing on, and thumbs up, thumbs down. You can
Exactly.
go racing again, or you're taking another week off type of deal.
Yeah,
Now, so you said it was a eight
channels. Yeah,
channel. So now when you say 8-channel versus you said 16 or 32 or something for yours.
it's how many electrodes are placed on the head.
Yeah. So is that giving less of a brain map or a
Less
EEG
resolution.
reading then? Just less resolution.
Less
Okay.
resolution. Yeah, you're not able to isolate exactly where activity's coming from deeper down. So you would still want a deeper in clinic analysis.
Yeah.
But this is something that can be done like, we can be doing training at home. We can be doing assessment to say like, okay, like, hey, we just want to know like,
Yeah.
am I good or am I not good, right? Stuff like that. I think it can be incredibly applicable.
Yeah.
But you still are gonna need those higher
deeper
resolution
dive,
units.
yeah.
Exactly.
But this is a
yeah.
good way to let you know that there maybe is a problem, like an early detection system, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So so we're really looking at
Cool.
rolling that stuff out.
Yeah.
Oh man, this
Soon.
is I'm on board with all this.
Oh, I know, right?
We gotta like
We're right in the middle of this technology shift and shift in people's mindsets and this stuff. So this is really cool to kind of be in the middle of it, and almost, you said you started 7 years ago with this stuff, but it feels like this is the forefront. Like you're still in the forefront of this, right?
Yeah.
I guess 7 years in terms of medical stuff is not all that long.
It's not. And I mean, there was already a lot out there when I got involved. Like, I laugh all the time because when I first moved to Calgary and I got introduced to all this and, functional medicine, integrative medicine, and all of the like commercial testing that was out there, like approved testing that wasn't being used in Canada. I just was like, I moved, my wife actually didn't move up for about a year. I lived here by myself. I didn't have a TV. I had one couch, I had a coffee table, and I had books stacked everywhere. And that's all I did. Like I didn't do anything else. I just read because I was like, man, we know so much already. And then you get to the point now where I'm at, where I'm like, man, there's so much we don't know.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, it's exciting, man. The neurotech world is it's phenomenal. It's something that I'm hoping to put a little more energy into stepping into here soon. So
awesome. Do you find there's still some people that are like stuck in the mainstream narrative of like this? We got to like the doctors, what they say is right, and anything outside of that is kind of taboo. Do you get any kind of that vibe at all? Or I guess anyone that's willing to step out into your clinic is probably already past that point anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't get much of that. Sometimes I do from like parents or family members that don't even take the time to actually come into their family member's appointment and then have all the things to say on the side, and you're like, man, like, can you just listen to the recording that I made? But, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, everyone's really good, and I'm always willing to share research. I'm always willing to admit what I don't know, right? And I don't want to take away from mainstream medicine because I use it all the time, right?
Well,
like we work with doctors and pharmacists all the time because there's so many good tools in that world, right? But it's just picking the right tool for the job, right? I'm not going to hammer a nail into a wall with a screwdriver, right?
Yeah.
So
you could do it. It's just going to take forever.
Sure. Yeah.
And you might bend the nail and break a screwdriver too, but hey, you can make it happen.
Every scar is a side effect. Yeah.
So you're originally from the States?
No, I'm Sylvan Lake actually.
Oh, Sylvan Lake, cool.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of schooling in the States. Did a little bit of schooling in Europe. But yeah, I was moved to Sylvan when I was 11 and pretty much grew up there. And yeah, that was where I sustained most of my injuries. But it was a fun time anyway. And then went to Red Deer College, then U of A, and just kind of got plugged in. U of A was where I really like started getting my issues. So that's an incredible university.
Water damaged building by any chance?
So interesting. So here's another interesting thing, and it's unfortunate it took me so long to figure this out because I would have tested myself. But my childhood house when I think about 14 was the first time it flooded, and then again 16, and then again 17. And it was like, I was incurring concussions at that point. And, I look back and I'm like, man, I wonder, right? Because I do actually have a genetic susceptibility for it. So it's like, I kind of wonder, what went on there. But, it's funny because, like, the deeper you look, the more you find that you can work on. Because I look at, like, developmental trauma now, too. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, I had some incidences that were like, absolutely potentially traumatizing experiences.
Yeah.
And, I had a tick bite when I was in Nicaragua, traveling around backpack in Nicaragua in 2013. Sickest I've ever been for like a week. They thought I had dengue fever. I was literally hallucinating. I was so sick.
Wow.
In this like moldy ass hostel in the middle of San Juan del Sur and
just where you want to be when you're sick.
Yeah. So you start looking at all these other factors, right? And that's always the take home for me is I like to kind of pull people's attention away from like that one thing that they think did everything, right? It's like everything was fine until I hit my head, and it was like, well, no, there was a lot that was underlying, right? And there's a lot of stuff that was stressing your body, but it was enough that it was able to keep things in check.
Yeah.
But this was the straw that broke the camel's back. It
Yeah.
wasn't everything. It wasn't the end all be all. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
You weren't
yeah.
looking at all these other things, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of like, I was just thinking right now, like, it almost seems overwhelming how you have all this knowledge and you're so in tune with the way you feel. You're almost like overthinking everything. How do you, like, I guess that would be your answer, just kind of breaking it down and not saying it was just one thing. But it almost feels like if I were in your shoes, I'd be like overthinking every little thing. And, oh, well, I did this when I was 12 and I hit my head when I was 13 here and I hit my head when I was 14
Become
uh,
here.
a
and
hypochondriac
insane,
of
right?
concussions.
well, and that's I mean, but it is to a degree that's important because it's systems thinking, right? It's like, okay, what's interrupting the system?
Yeah.
But that's why you look at a brain map, because it literally, like, your brain and your body will tell you what's wrong. You just need to know how to assess it.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, I've seen some just phenomenal brain maps that illustrate this, where we're working on someone, like someone comes in, first line, it's like, oh man, this is trauma. Like, this person's got some trauma that they got to work through. Right. So we put them through the programs that are necessary, give them the referrals they need for working through their trauma. And then all of a sudden they come back and they're like, yeah, I was feeling really good. And then, like, I kind of got these other weird symptoms coming up. And it's like, okay, let's take a look. Inflammation. And you're like, wow. And so you go in, figure out what's causing inflammation. They're like, yeah, feeling amazing now. And you're like, the brain is literally telling us what is wrong, but we just don't know how to right? Like for us sitting here right now is like, I don't even let my intuition tell me what's wrong. Like, I'll use it a bit. And like, okay, think maybe, but then I always look at a brain map because I know my brain's going to tell me what's wrong.
Yeah.
But we just haven't deciphered the language yet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are, I think, we're in the process of it. Like, we're making leaps and bounds of discovery there. But yeah, the body and the brain will literally tell you what's wrong if you look in the right place, if you learn how to listen to it, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny actually how accurate people's intuition are. Like, people coming in, they're like, I think this is what's going on, but like my doctor thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, let's look at it. And it's like, yep, you're right. Like, you're you know, and it's wild. And I'll have people that are taking vitamins and they have no idea. They're like, I don't know, I just felt like it was a good thing to do. And I'm like looking at blood work and I'm like, actually,
It's a good thing you took it.
like, keep doing it, right?
Yeah.
I'm always blown away by that.
Yeah. It was funny. I was gonna say, like, it's funny that you don't want to trust your intuition there, but you're saying people's intuition is really strong and really good.
I think there's a balance. I think it's like you have an intuitive idea, and it's like and you know, this happens in science all the time. It's like,
here's
maybe this is how it works, right? And then we test it. And so that's what I do. I don't fully trust my intuition. I use it to guide me, but then I confirm it, right? I verify it with other means to go, I am on the right track, right? And if I'm not, then I go, okay, well, what else explains it, right? What else explains this pattern of activity with how I'm feeling? And that's all it's about. It's just pattern recognition, right?
And again, like, we've said it probably too many times this episode, but that's where you're, like, the evidence you guys kind of pull out from the body is, you know, backing up that intuition or backing up that feeling or backing, you know, it's reassuring you that you do know what's wrong with your body. You should listen to it. You should if your body's telling you, hey, take it easy today, maybe take it easy today. Or if it's saying,
that's
hey,
right.
Or maybe you're just lazy. Like, who
yeah,
knows, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There you go. Right. There you go.
That's really fun. Like, you say people come in and they say, oh, I just started taking, like, more than just multivitamin. They're taking like a D6 and a B5 and like they just randomly start taking random vitamins and it's good for them. I mean, I had a woman one time come in and she was actually taking a hormone that was kind of hard to get in Canada, DHEA, like without prescription. It used to be a little easier to get. You can't anymore, but yeah, you know, she comes in, she's like, yeah, I'm on DHEA. And I was like, okay, like, who prescribed that? Who are you working with? She's like, oh, no one, I just ordered it. And I kind of look at her, I'm like, okay, like, interesting. Like, you haven't had any testing? Like, no.
Like I don't know. I felt like it just like seemed right. I was reading on it.
Yeah.
Felt like I had a lot of the symptoms, and it's funny, right? Because you look at symptoms, it could be 100 things.
Oh, the same symptom lines up with 30 different diagnoses,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So she had, like a 0.3% chance of it actually being that, and I'm like, okay, well, like stop it so that we can see what your tests look like without being on it, right?
Right.
Comes back and yeah, she's just tanked, like no DHEA levels. I'm like, yep, well, you're right. So
Wow.
let's maybe get you a prescription for it though.
Let's regulate it. Let's monitor it. Let's make sure you're not abusing, and harming your body.
Yeah,
And that's like going back to the medical, what did you call them? Psychedelics?
Psychedelics, yeah.
Monitored, regulated,
Yeah.
and controlled. Not just go willy-nilly with this shit out there and,
yeah.
think that, dropping acid at a concert tonight's going to fix your depression, because it's not.
People underestimate psychedelics, man. I'll tell you, it's it throws a lot of people into crisis, but
Oh yeah, you can only imagine.
and it's impossible to explain, right? Like, and until you've actually experienced psychedelics, it's hard. You can't explain it, to someone that hasn't experienced it before. So, but there are a lot of good training programs, even for people that aren't therapists or psychologists, that can learn about like safe administration of these things and actually help people go through like a guided psychedelic journey.
Yeah,
and
like a
and
shaman
again
type guy.
exactly, but now it's like the basement shaman, right?
Yeah.
The shaman of Canada. But yeah, I mean the research is incredible. I mean, ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA now coming up, it's almost irrefutable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to see that starting to get integrated. Yeah.
All these things together, all these changes, maybe not all of them are 100% or going to be the best thing, but I think it's all good at the end of the day to explore these different options. And it's almost like going back to the ancient Chinese medicine where they were trying different herbs and stuff, right? It's just like, oh well, let's give him this here, because
all these things, all these psychedelics were used in like ancient times, right?
Yeah.
It's full circle.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard of the stoned ape theory.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where-
Yeah. Like 40,000 years ago, all of a sudden, all this creative art and expression and engineering, it's like, what the heck happened?
How'd that come?
mushrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the theory, anyway.
That's a theory. I like it. I like
it
that
too.
theory. It's a theory. It hasn't been disproven.
Change
so
my
it's
mind.
Still a theory. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at, it's kind of interesting because we're actually at a time in history where we always talk about going full circle, right? Whether it's fashion or ideologies. We're going full circle, but we're kind of bringing everything along. So it's like, like 2000 BC was like, oh, that prayer is heathen, take this route, right?
Yes.
And then it was like 1900, it was like, oh, that route is heathen, take this drug, right? And now we're coming back to that drug is heathen, take this route. And it's just like kind of, but now we're seeing everything being integrated, and like our biggest goal is to show like all of this stuff is effective. It's just like when and where should it be integrated, and when and where does it work for people, right? It's exciting times. Yeah.
I think that's a big problem too, right? Like people will have one bad experience with one thing, and they're like, "Oh, that's nonsense. No one should use this."
Right.
But there is a time and place for pretty much everything, right?
Exactly. And it's different for person to person. Like
Totally.
I can always tell, like, you just have a conversation with people. The other funny thing too is if you just listen to people and ask the right questions, they'll usually tell you what's wrong. It's interesting. But some people come in and they're like absolutely against pharmaceutical medications. So, it's like, well, understanding the placebo effect and how the brain works, there's an art to medicine.
Yeah.
And that has been attempted to be squashed out, which I don't appreciate. Because we need some flexibility to be able to, like, for instance, if somebody is absolutely set on the fact that they are going to get better avoiding pharmaceutical medicine. Well, why would it be in mine or their interest for me to recommend pharmaceutical meds when we know that there are natural medications out there that can do similar things?
Right.
Yeah, they might not be as strong, they might not have as much data, but we understand the functionality of them. Why wouldn't I use that?
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be more effective because our mindset actually creates the effectiveness of things to a certain degree, right? So yeah, it's important to have all these options, right? Yeah. So I think we're living in a cool time that is transforming very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. Yeah.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, I'm speechless. I have so many questions.
Well, here, let's bring up.
Oh yeah, we got a question from a fan of ours.
So this fan would love to hear more about. She says CPTSD / developmental trauma, and the difference in how it affects the brain versus a concussion.
Aha, cool. All right, great question. How much time we have?
We got all night.
30 seconds.
I got to work at 7 a.m. We're good till then.
So CPTSD, obviously a term for complex PTSD or complex post-traumatic traumatic stress syndrome disorder. That and developmental trauma create a certain type of injury in the brain. And when we talk about trauma, this is really important to understand because trauma is different for everybody. Potentially traumatizing experiences is what we call them. So, I could be at a party and somebody could, a friend could make fun of me and I could think, everyone starts laughing. They think that, oh, it's just funny. And I'm actually insulted and embarrassed. That's a potentially traumatizing experience because it's someone you trust doesn't understand your needs and then betrays them. So it's little things like that. And a lot of times complex PTSD is not one event. It's not like this one big thing, like I was sexually assaulted or, I was locked in my room for a week at a time and, fed out of a dog dish or, it's nothing like, it doesn't need to be like that. It can literally be a parent that constantly invalidates your experience in a very low grade way.
Right.
And you get these, what are called attachment issues where there's a protection problem and an attachment problem, and the brain has a hard time understanding when it needs to avoid something and when it actually can safely approach. And so this can lead to behaviors like maladaptive behaviors of all sorts. The injury that happens is at the level of the limbic system, which you don't really see with concussion. Concussion can cause limbic system trauma if you lose function. So to where I was, I was close to committing suicide when I was 19. At that point that becomes a trauma because I am just so messed up. Right. So that's traumatic or potentially traumatizing. But that will look different in the brain, than a limbic system injury. And so the biggest problem with, as compared to concussion compared to developmental trauma or complex PTSD, is that complex PTSD will teach you maladaptive behaviors in order to emotionally survive. So you'll attach to things or people or events that you can basically crutch on. And as soon as those people, events, or things go away, now you actually have this massive withdrawal response, and you can destabilize. And so you'll see this synonymously kind of used with codependency. Where we're codependent on someone else, where we can't be independent without someone else. And this can lead to a lot of relationship strain. But a lot of it just goes back to this implicit memory. So the limbic system consists of an area called the amygdala, which is stands for almond in Latin, actually. It looks like a little almond. There's one on the right side and one on the left side, and the medial temporal, so it's kind of like 2 to 3 inches inside the brain on each side. And it holds all of our implicit memories. So everything that's ever happened to us, literally since we're in our mom's womb, 3rd trimester.
Wow.
All the sensory experiences that have ever happened, and they're all tagged. So it's kind of like if you understand like AI, where you like you like can teach AI how to like tag things.
Yeah.
So it's like your amygdala is tagging things, like it's either positive or negative, positive or negative, positive or negative. And that's all tucked in the subconscious. And then we have this other area called the hippocampus, which is our explicit memory center. So it's the stuff we can remember. Like, I remember when I was 3 years old, I came running around the bath mat, slipped on it and hit my eye socket on the knob of the toilet, gave myself a black eye, right? And like, I remember hanging out on the roof when I was 3 years old while my dad was doing shingling,
Yeah.
like stuff like that we can pull up. And then we have this area called the insula, which is the volume knob of the brain. So it's the volume knob for emotional sensation. So how loud or how quiet is something? So, if I hear a noise, my insula can crank the volume up and basically be like, whoa, that's a threat. You need to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Good example is like if we were in a restaurant right now talking, we would need to turn the volume knob down on everybody around us and turn the volume up on us, right? Because the truth of the matter is the brain is encoding about 10 terabytes of information every second.
Whew.
And we are only consciously aware of about 10,000 gigabytes of that. Wait,
Wow.
wild.
Yeah.
So that, that, I mean, I could be just drawing conclusions here, but is that part of the reason why when you dream, your dreams are made up of all that information that you didn't really process? Is because your brain's actually processing, you just didn't realize it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what'll happen is when you have complex PTSD or developmental trauma, which I just think is a form of complex PTSD.
Yeah.
And everybody has it to a degree, by the way. Nobody has ever gone through life without having some degree of developmental trauma. It's just the reality.
Yep.
What'll happen is your brain is constantly taking snapshots of what's happening right now. And this, remember how I talked about it takes 300 to 400 milliseconds to be consciously aware of something? Your limbic system is making the decision on whether something is safe or threatening within 100 to 200 milliseconds before we're even consciously aware of what's going on.
Jeez.
Our limbic system decides based on old experience in the implicit memory center whether something's safe or threatening. So if you say something I don't agree with, my brain, before I'm even consciously aware of it, will go, no, that's not true. And it'll start making up a story as to why that's not true. And we need to be careful with this. And I think it's important. I mean, honestly, our kids should be learning about this. We should be learning about this and how our brain works in elementary school.
Yeah.
This whole social media algorithm stuff would be a thing of the past. But anyway,
Yeah, no shit.
maybe that's for another podcast.
Yeah,
but
we'll line up a second one for that guy.
So what'll happen is that you're comparing the experience and you're going, okay, is this more positive than negative? If it's more positive and it's more safe, more not necessarily positive, but more safe. If it's safe, I can approach it. I can engage it. If it's not, I need to be hyper vigilant. I may need to freeze. I may need to run, or I may need to fight. And those are the three responses: is faint or freeze, and that's when you're like overwhelmed and you just kind of do that.
Yeah.
Fight, which would be if we were talking and we'd argue, and flight would be I would just cower and go, okay, I agree, when I don't actually agree. And I would betray myself and my needs to say it's easier if I just don't say what I actually think.
For sure.
So this is happening all the time. And so our nervous system is guiding this. There's one other one called collapse. And that's when you're completely overwhelmed. You literally like faint, right?
Yeah.
So those will actually cause us to create behaviors that will basically make us behave in a way that keeps us safe, right? So if I feel like I need to avoid all the time, then that's what I'll do. I'll withdraw, I'll avoid. And so there's a lot that needs to be dug into there. Like you literally need to look into your past at how did these patterns emerge. And then you need to have conscious awareness behind that and move forward and consciously break those patterns.
Which is not an easy task.
Not easy.
Yeah.
Trauma takes time and it takes commitment.
Yeah.
Like you need to be willing to dig into stuff that's uncomfortable. And you need to be committed to making changes and recognizing behaviors, right, as you go. But fascinating thing that can happen to the brain. And again, it's all out of survival, right? It's like what was easiest in that situation. And it kind of overlaps concussion because the brain will do that with concussion after a hit. It readapts in the easiest way possible. And the limbic brain does the same thing when you have a trauma.
There's-
It's like, what's
yeah.
the easiest way out of this, right?
Huh.
What's the safest, easiest
Yeah,
way
yeah.
for me to preserve my emotional and physical
Yeah.
body?
And easiest is not always best.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's having the hard conversations, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, most of the times it comes from us learning behaviors from the people that we spent the most time around. You know, frequently it's our parents. You know,
Yep.
it might have been aunts, uncles, grandparents,
Siblings.
siblings, friends.
Yeah.
Those are the people that we're learning from and we're mimicking, right?
Absolutely.
And we're just then trying to keep ourselves safe throughout that process. So.
Wow.
Really complex field, really interesting field, but
yeah.
there's 8 different patterns on functional brain map that can tell you to what degree you are in a trauma response and what kind of the best ways are to work through it. So
So you would recommend, or I don't know if you would recommend, but you would say like coming and getting a brain map would be beneficial for people with even CPTSD or
absolutely.
This isn't something like that's kind of what I want to bring to light here is like it's not just for people who've had concussions.
That's right.
Like you guys will look at and treat people with multiple different things, concussion or like you said, anxiety, depression, CPTSD.
Any
Pretty much anything.
any symptom of the brain, in my opinion, any symptom of the brain, you need proper imaging. Quantitative EEG, sometimes a quantitative MRI.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what symptom it is. It doesn't matter what you think caused it because we see people sometimes that are like, yeah, like I had a messed up childhood, I had a ton of trauma, and they come in and they have a massive metabolic problem and a massive inflammatory problem, and it's like you're not going to be able to process this trauma very well when you're dealing with a metabolic deficit, right? Because this stuff's energy hungry. Like it's anyone that's done trauma work, it's depleting. Like it's exhausting. It's like a friggin' hard workout to try to work through this stuff. So if you don't have the metabolics or you're inflamed, you got to work that stuff out first. And a lot of times people will find when you do that and you get on like peptide therapies, all of a sudden you can hit the brake pedal on these responses and you're like, oh, no, actually I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, there you go.
Well,
right?
that's how I was supposed to deal with that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so again, to me, your brain it just is, it's talking to us.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about all this stuff, it's crazy how much of a role environment plays in all of this. Like your environment as a child, as you're an adult, the environment and the people you surround yourself as an adult. It's crazy. It's like almost overwhelming. But then also you think about, like, man, when the first time I got that brain map, and I was like, man, like, do I really have free will over anything I'm doing, or is this all just like, this is all just like my instincts and evolutionary things happening that I just do without even knowing why?
Yeah.
And then you have a story as to why you did it.
Yeah.
That's the funny philosophical argument, isn't it?
Man, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's we're shaped by the physical environment, we're shaped by the intellectual environment, the social environment, the emotional environment, the spiritual environment. It's why you can look through different cultures and they all have so much uniqueness and your features and their behaviors and how they treat people. And I mean that we're a product of our every environment, from the physical up to the light that's shining on us, right? It's interesting.
So I got one more fan submitted question
Okay.
here. We got lots of fans. So like before, you had mentioned the leaky gut symptom type of deal from post concussion. So what would be one or some hidden symptoms that people might have that could be related to a brain or concussion injury that they may not think, or that a typical doctor may not think is related to the brain? Like, is there anything? That's kind of a difficult question maybe to answer, but if you can shed any light on that.
And maybe in specific relation to the gut then? Or
anything, whether it's the gut or like we talked about it with inflammation or I guess when you talk about that's where it's like kind of a little bit of a difficult question, but is there anything gut related or heart related or muscle, I don't know, that comes from, post-concussion syndromes or a brain injury, CPTSD, that you wouldn't think?
Yeah, probably one of the best examples is chronic pain. So, people develop this like diffuse, which just means like kind of everywhere, chronic pain after concussion. A lot of times that is the brain not interpreting pain signals properly. So basically the pain threshold drops, and then every sensation just feels like pain. So a lot of times, like, your first go-to is like, okay, there's pain everywhere, there must be a massive amount of inflammation, and that's not always the case. Right. So sometimes people have learned their way into pain. And it's really interesting because this brings up the topic of dissociation, which actually connects back to PTSD, where the brain has the ability to structurally and emotionally dissociate, where something can be so emotionally painful that brain will just go, yeah, we're just going to shut that off. And we're not even going to go there. And it's a survival mechanism, but it makes it hard for them to be in tune with their body. And a lot of times what you'll see is that emotional pain starts manifesting physically because the synaptic threshold on pain processing centers drops. So all of a sudden it's like you got pain everywhere in your body, and all it is emotional pain from the past. So that's probably the best example. And then you'll sometimes see the opposite, where people have the structural dissociation, where there's been like so much, maybe they've been physically abused a lot, or they've been, bullied to the point where they hate their body, or they've just been like looking at marketing too much and how like a man or a woman should look, and they just like hate their body. They'll dissociate from it. It's really interesting having conversations with people that are dissociated, because they'll literally see a different person in the mirror, and like literally, like, for some people it's hard to understand, but
a lot of this I think is hard for other people to understand if you haven't gone through it. But if you can take what you've gone through and still empathize with somebody going through something different, or sympathize, whatever the right word there would be.
Be sympathize, I guess, at that point.
Right. Yeah. You can still relate or sympathize, and go through kind of what they're feeling, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of people that look at it as just, oh, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Toughen up. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. Let's get to work.
Yeah. Stop drinking coffee and you'll be back.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's so yeah, with structural dissociation, it would be a dissociation from the body. So people derealize, they don't feel like they're here. They'll say that they feel like they're in a dream. Yeah. And they're emotionally in a lot of pain. And it's interesting, like that's where you'll see like these body sensations, or the dissociation from the body. It's really related to the brain and how the brain's interpreting pain. But it'll look like, oh, there's this massive amount of inflammation in the body.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, you bring up a great point on that too, of like the people being able to understand. And I think this is another thing that needs to be talked about more, is that I think sometimes people take things personally when people express something to them, where it's like they're like, this is how I feel, and it's like, well, I need to fix that, or like, well, no, you know what, you don't need to feel that way. And it's the worst thing you can say. Yeah. And like, I'm sorry, I hate to say it, but it's the worst thing you can say. Is that, well, just like snap out of it, or just it's fine. Like, just don't think about it. It's like, well, no, that's not how this works. It's like, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. This isn't comfortable, but it would be great if you just hold a bit of space for me while I can express this. Because we have a lot of invalidation going on, right? Where it's like, I'm expressing my reality and how I perceive things and how I perceive what's going on with me, right? And then someone invalidates them and doesn't really realize it, right? Yeah. Where it's like, well, no, you don't really feel that way. Oh. It's like, no, I do. Like, this is like, I spend more time in here than you do, right? Yeah. And it's like, you don't have to tell me that. It doesn't make anything better.
We're all probably guilty of doing that, invalidating somebody at some point, right? Like,
totally.
That's almost the default, because that's what, you learned as a kid to, comfort someone was, oh, it's okay. It's don't worry about it. It's okay. Let's move on. Let's
think about roses and daisies.
So
it's, and you know what, it comes from generations after generation not being able to regulate. And this is probably the most interesting field in trauma right now, is intergenerational trauma. So Rachel Yehuda is, in my opinion, one of the leading researchers in the world on this. She's at Mount Sinai University. She's a psychiatrist. They've been doing epigenetic testing on generations following Holocaust survivors. And they've actually found altered expression of genetic material. And so this isn't the DNA. This is actually what genes are being turned on and turned off, relating into memory centers and emotional regulation centers in the brain. So traumas from 2, 3, 4 generations ago are still affecting people. So it's interesting, because if we're not aware of that, then like we don't know why we're uncomfortable around like these like negatively like culture calls like, oh, you shouldn't be sad, you shouldn't be mad. Stuff like that, right? And so we get uncomfortable around that, and then we just decide that we're going to invalidate and go, well, no, you shouldn't look at it that way, or like, no, that's not. And of course, I'm guilty of this too. You know, I've been, becoming more aware every day of it. But yeah, that invalidation is another trauma, because it's like, well, no, you're not even attempting to understand. Like, just listen, just hold space for me. This is gonna be difficult, right? But yeah, that's that trauma. The trauma thing's really interesting. I think more people are affected by it than we realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like it, at least, right? Like when you break it down in those terms and in that way, probably majority of people have some form of issue going on from either. And if you're saying this intergenerational trauma thing too, like. That is insane to think about. Something that happened to your grandparents is still in some way living through you, maybe not living through, but manifesting through you. You're unaware of it.
What it suggests is your implicit memory system is holding that, and it's influencing your subconscious behavior. So it's one of the reasons why it's always important when you have some sort of visceral reaction to just pause and take a breath. Right. And just take a moment, because let that stimulus kick into the conscious brain, right? Don't let that limbic brain make the decision, because it's not logical. It doesn't have access to logic or reason. And so it's still okay to express how it made you feel, but it's about kind of, making sure you're not overreacting in a way that's like, okay, well, this made me feel this way. And then I always like to look at it as to why. Like, why did that make me feel that way? Yeah. Right. Always like interested in that. It's perfectly like, well, I'm not going to invalidate how I feel. Like, I felt this way. It pissed me off, right? Or made me really sad. But why, I wonder, right? Yeah. And digging into that.
Well, one of the things I was taught was like, ask yourself why 5 times. Yeah. You'll get to the root of something. Right? Why did I feel that way? And then you say, okay, well, I felt that way because, but why did that? Why? You get to the root of what's really coming through you. And maybe that doesn't work in every situation, but that was kind of one of those things that has stuck with me throughout my life. And I thought it was really interesting. And you saying you ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Why? That is, more people need to ask why, instead of just doing and following and trusting their limbic system. Ask why.
Yeah, don't let the story run itself.
That's right.
That's the story. Most of the time is a lie or an excuse. Yeah. So you react, and then you go, well, this is why this is the story I'm telling myself. And I always like to not to say I'm definitely guilty of reacting. But I like that. Ask why 5 times. Quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask.
That's right.
That's a good point.
There you go.
Yeah.
Had a mentor who used to say that all the time.
That is a really, that's a statement that I think people need to listen to again. So can you repeat that?
The quality of your life is based on the quality of questions you ask.
There we go.
That should be a show title.
Right? That is really good.
That's great.
That is really, really good.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's almost like this whole intergenerational trauma response. It almost seems to me like an evolutionary response to avoid being killed or something like that, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah. It's I mean, there's been theories for this for a long time as to why these genes and why things are preserved like that. Absolutely. We learn from the experience of our ancestors, right? Yeah. I think it's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I'm envious of some cultures in the world that are like, you know, literally die to preserve their family heritage and their
Yeah.
ancestral heritage, right? To understand. I see the importance in it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Again, another ancestral wisdom thing, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
It's mind blowing to think that someone that you didn't even know can pass on some kind of
Yeah.
information to you.
yeah.
yeah.
It's mind blowing. And well, obviously we all know what happens because we've evolved from the Stone Age, right? But it's like to really break it down to that scientific of a level is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing like science is meeting. I mean, it's even starting to meet spirituality. Like it, you know, we're actually like starting to understand, like, you know, looking at people that are expert meditators and whatnot, like expressing massive amounts of gamma out of their brain, like what you would see when you see somebody on DMT.
Yeah.
Like, wow, like, and these people are going in and out of it willingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I've been watching that Joe Dispenza documentary when I'm doing my neurofeedback sessions. I'm like, oh, well, maybe this is why religion is a thing. I get it now.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
the foundations of it are incredible. It's, you know, again, kind of in some ways it gets skewed and lost a bit and muddied sometimes because of some people's interpretations of it. But yeah, I think, like, again, you can bring it back grounded in science and go, oh, hey,
Yeah.
look at this. There's something here. There's something real. We've had a couple patients who are you know, like you know, originally were like self-proclaimed intuitives or self-proclaimed empaths. That's what I, you know, call people like that. So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't have any proof that you're an empath or an intuitive or
Yeah.
you know, you have any magical powers of any sort, right? like show me your magic.
Yeah.
But we've seen a few EEGs of waveforms in the brain that I've never seen in any of the like 20,000 brain maps that I've looked at, and I'm seeing this, like, it's not epilepsy, it's not anything I've ever seen. It's this like specific waveform, and I'm like, wow, okay, like I'm listening, right? You know, it's like you're expressing something I've never seen before.
Huh.
So yeah, it's just I don't know, it's fascinating times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll send you this
Yeah.
documentary series because it starts off like pretty realistic, and you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa. Then it gets up to here, and you're like, whoa, DMT in the brain. I'm like, whoa. But like they break it down well, so it all makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's crazy.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay, we got one more question from you, from probably our biggest fan.
I think I got another question after
Oh,
this.
you got
but
one more
okay.
question? Okay, our biggest fan's question, Keelan Meston.
Oh, he's listening.
He's,
The co-host.
the co-host, Keelan Meston, wants to know what he has maybe seen so far with COVID and its damaging effects on the brain and neural pathways. I know you touched on the inflammation portion, but can you touch on any of that?
Like is he talking about like lockdowns or like
Yeah.
all the whole social?
You know what? Go into both of it. Why not? Both the disease itself and a social aspect.
All
of
right.
it.
Oh, here we go. Rabbit hole. All right. So physically, with post-COVID syndrome. So COVID itself, like most people that get COVID, they're gonna recover fine. They're gonna build natural immunity. They're gonna build antibodies. Those antibodies are gonna stick around for about 4 to 6 months, and then they're gonna build T-cell immunity that we predict will probably be around for decades.
Yeah.
People that develop post-COVID syndrome, again, interesting water damage building tie here. There's actually published literature on this now. Actinomyces exposure is preventing some people from being able to fully repair. So they get brain fog, fatigue, weakness, headaches, joint pain, muscle pain, poor memory, poor focus, fatigue, sleep issues, hormone imbalances. There's about 37 different symptoms. And it's similar to the chronic inflammatory response syndrome that concussion can sometimes trigger. VIP peptide, been incredible for helping with that. A lot of other therapies that are useful. So far, we haven't seen a post-COVID case that hasn't significantly improved. So in terms of long-term, again, you know, I haven't seen anybody that's more than a year typically post-COVID. I don't know what's going to happen when I start seeing people that are 10 or 15
Right.
years before they like actually, you know, find other solutions.
Yeah.
It does trigger a certain degree of what's called hypometabolism, where the mitochondria, the little power plants in our cell, are not able to, they basically shut down due to a viral threat. This is an evolutionary thing too, because if a virus gets into a cell, we don't want it to have access to hijack all of our energy resources. So the mitochondria have this little thing where they go, oh, cell danger, kind of like the limbic system, and go, we're going to shut down. So they shut off energy. So we can't build energy through the Krebs cycle anymore, which means we only get 1/18 of the amount of energy that we could make from, say, a glucose molecule.
Right.
So we're very inefficient at this point. So we can get really tired. And then you can have problems with atrophy, where the brain doesn't have the energy it needs to keep and sustain the same amount of pathways that it has. So you start losing volume in your brain. I saw a guy today that he's felt like he's been on adrenaline for the last month. And that's what's happened. The brake pedal of his brain has shrunk too much, and now he can't press the brake pedal on all of his electrical activity in his brain. So there has been some depression, there's been some mood issues, there's been some sleep issues. So that's the actual physical effect of COVID. Again, we don't know what like 10 years is going to bring for people that are in this state. It's probably going to look similar to someone that was exposed to a water damaged building, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Not so many communication problems, but more structural problems with loss of volume and enlarged and inflamed areas, causing dizziness and headaches and stuff. Now we talk social policy, political policy. Very, very problematic in my opinion. It's really tough because we're trying to do a balancing act of not, overwhelming the hospitals and not overwhelming healthcare, because we weren't prepared for this. Right. It was we always do this as humans. We never prepare for the worst.
No.
It's like times are good. It's like when oil was at the high, $120 a barrel.
Spend that money, buddy.
Right? And then it's like, oh shit, I don't have a job now, and and my truck's only worth a tenth of what it was.
I got 3 kids to feed. I don't.
It's the human condition, right?
It is,
and we
totally.
do it all the way to the highest level, where it's like, hey, we've had pandemics in the past, and it's like, it's inevitable. Like, we should probably be leveraged, and guess what? We're not.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're trying to do this balancing act. The problem is, I think that there is more social and emotional suffering than we're saving on the physical side.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Most people that are dying from this are elderly. Most people have comorbidities. So, it's really tough, because on one hand, it's like, well, we have to do our best to save everybody. On the other hand, when overdoses have gone up the way they've gone up since the beginning of the pandemic, when domestic abuse has gone up like it's gone up, it's hard to justify some of the severe restrictions that we've had.
Yeah.
So I know personally, the amount of people that we have had coming in since May of last year is insane. And I know that it's not just due to, the awareness of what we do growing.
Right.
A lot of it is that people that were like, they were dealing with, anxiety. They had some low-grade anxiety, low-grade depression, low-grade trauma responses, but they were managing. It was fine.
Yeah.
They were able to manage their world, manage their job. All of a sudden they weren't. And it is an absolute epidemic. I mean, trying to get in with psychologists and counselors now, it's a wait list everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think, again, for me, the way I always look at, like, even my own personal medical decisions is, what's the cost benefit, right? So yes, there's a risk for me going out, and, I'm young and healthy, thankfully. I'm gonna put my chips on the fact that if I get COVID, I'm probably gonna be okay. If I get post-COVID, I have some solutions that can probably help me. What I don't have is the ability to stay sane without having social interaction. So I know that for myself. I know myself, right? So that's the way I look at it. And I think a lot of other people I've talked to, my age up until even early 50s, are like, you know what? I do dangerous things every day. You know what? I drive to work every day. You know how dangerous that is?
Yeah, really?
You're a
It
wild
is.
boy,
No,
yeah.
absolutely.
It
100%
is.
agree.
Driving is one of the most dangerous
Yeah.
things we do. But guess what? We've been desensitized to it. We got used to it, and we came to grips with the fact that the reward was worth the consequences
Yeah.
that might happen.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to have to run to work,
Yeah.
12 kilometers every day each way.
Yeah, and
Right,
to your
so-
point, there's people that will not drive,
Right.
and they won't. There's people that won't drive at all. There's people that won't drive on Deerfoot. There's people that won't drive, out of town. There's different levels of
Right.
assessing that risk too.
There,
Totally.
there you go, right? And it really needs to be, the decision needs to be made by us.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, lay out the risks for us. What's the risk of us going and getting COVID and getting extremely ill,
Yeah.
right? Because the point of in a pandemic, the point is to get everybody immune, right? And so when we lock down and we avoid each other, we just delay the inevitable, and it, a lot of people suffer because of it. The economy suffers because of it. I'm not an economist. I'm not, I'm this is not my specialty, but I've just seen people with, financial ruin. I've seen people go through all these issues, and I just don't, I think we, as on the political level, we need to really be evaluating the kind of better good, like where we can't help absolutely everybody be healthy across the board. So, I'd rather not create this massive cultural trauma that's going to reverberate for 7 generations.
We're dealing with a, essentially a worldwide ethics problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're saying, who do we save? What's worth it?
And it's polarizing everyone
and
against each other.
Oh, absolutly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that drives me the most nuts, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's great. That's a great point. The ethics, right? And I think like it's great. We have a vaccine now. Amazing. Vaccinate the people that are vulnerable and the people that want it, and they weigh out the risk and benefit. But this whole draconian, integration of you can't go to these places now.
Yeah.
You can't do this, you can't do that unless you're vaccinated. And there's not even any talk about natural immunity. We're not even, it's like we're not even interested in the data for antibodies or T-cell testing. And it's like, why? And again, I always ask the why.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Why are we not interested in that data? Because we know natural immunity is incredibly effective against COVID. It's more effective than vaccination, right? And so that's where I'm having some troubles too, because I have people I've had a lot of weeks the last month or two where at the end of the day I'm just like, man, I had to have another talk to someone who's they just really do not want to get vaccinated, or they don't want to, but they're like, I need to for work.
Yeah.
And to me that's never been medicine.
It's
Any,
another
anytime
stress on the brain that
exactly
causing an injury to them and
making them betray their own intuition and what they feel is right for them, and so these are big problems, and we haven't even seen the brunt of it yet, because we're just wait until these kids that have had to be wear masks in school for,
and that's
how
not even
long?
talked about, right?
No.
Not even talked about how that affects their developmental, how they read how people are feeling and how their faces react.
Yeah.
That's not even talked about.
well,
right?
that's one of the things that they've been saying about babies, right? They don't recognize a smile on a person right now, because all they know of a person is a mask on. They can see your eyebrows and they know how you're feeling through your eyebrows. Smile means nothing to a baby anymore.
Well, and there's only so much information that eyes can give, and that's
right.
the problem.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're taking a complex set of human emotions and you're turning it into 2 or 3 that can be interpreted through the eyes. And I mean, this is proven by functional MRI studies. If we don't have full facial features, we have a difficult time orienting emotionally. And so I mean, I have my predictions. I have my thoughts on what's going to happen. But it's not. I mean, we're not going to even see the full brunt of this until these kids have developed. And
it'll be a lifetime.
yeah.
And then maybe it'll be passed down to the next generation, as you've talked about with the intergenerational.
Yeah. Well, unless we figure out a way to cut that cord, that's exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
We could start growing babies in petri dishes, maybe. I don't know, but yeah. I mean, when I weigh out the risks and the benefits of things, you know, it's difficult because I mean, I get that cases are going up and you know things are going on, but you know, looking at data sets in certain ways, it also, you know, to me there's some of the things aren't adding up, and I think it's gotten hard because you have a lot of people standing up saying, okay, this is what we need to do. And it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And, you know, at some point it's like, okay, like we need a different strategy.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
like
there's two sides to the coin, but
Probably lied somewhere in the middle.
yeah, that's right. Like maybe stand the coin on its edge a little bit.
Yeah,
you know, give it a flick and see how long it spins.
it's a little bit of an art form to try to do that. But I mean, I think there is, you know, my understanding immunology too is, and I had, there's a lot of great talks from a lot of great immunologists that know a lot more than I do, but my understanding of immunology too is, you know, and especially the way that we're expressing one antigen in using a vaccine to express one antigen of a virus that has dozens of antigens around it that normally our immune system would need to kind of see all of those to surveil properly. You're going to see effectiveness of this vaccine drop off, and well, you already are, and you're going to see it drop quickly. And then where are we at? You know, and there's a point where vaccine load becomes a problem.
Yes.
Where more vaccines isn't necessarily more helpful. And this is an issue in immunology that we run into where we don't want to be over vaccinated. And so I just see potential of these protocols of driving us back in to another lockdown, because we're going to create antigenic escape, which is basically a viral form of antibiotic resistance. We're going to create more variants, and you know, it's different. We need to take a step back, I think.
Yeah.
And we need to look at, okay, you know, what is proper medicine? We can't be taking away the art of medicine from individual physicians, which we're doing, which isn't fair. Because for some people, this vaccine is not appropriate, and that needs to be weighed out. This idea that it's safe and effective, we need to be telling the truth. Yeah. And you know, on the other side, we need to tell the truth that COVID has consequences.
Absolutely, for sure.
That's just it. It's everything, right? Has its consequences and has its benefits and risks and rewards and all that stuff. And like you say, maybe a little bit of that decision needs to give it back to the people. Are some people capable of making that decision? Maybe not. They need a little influence.
Well, that's what I love about what you're saying, though. Like you're saying, you're giving all the information from both sides. I find so much. You either find you watching CNN and you're watching the mainstream. Oh, you got to get vaccinated, or you're the problem. And then on the other side, it's like, don't get vaccinated. Like, I think everyone needs to make their own decisions, and I think exactly what you're saying, right? The whole I use this term loosely because anti-vax, because that's what everyone's, you know, that doesn't want to get vaccinated. I've been called anti-vax while I'm vaxxed. Somehow. No, I know it. It's the belief system, right? But because it's both sides. You know, it's you know, the one side is like, well, you know, everybody's gonna die if they get vaccinated, and then the other side is like, if you don't get vaccinated, you're the problem. And you know, it's more about it's all gray area. And so we need to like really educate people on, okay, you know, here's how things work, and you know, the vaccine's going to be effective for this long, natural immunity is effective for this long. You know, you're an adult, make your decision, right? And you know, I think that's how it needs to be, because it's just, I don't see another way out of this. You know, well, aside from like COVID civil war.
Not far off.
So it's gonna have a lot of, it's a cultural trauma. It's a cultural trauma. It's gonna be talked about forever. And it's affecting people's brains big time.
Wow, man, this is a lot to take in.
Well, I got one more question. Sorry. You got time?
Do you remember it from?
I do remember. This is like one of the first. This is one of the first questions I came to mind. So I just wanted you to dive a little more into the science of the neurofeedback and the biofeedback, kind of the treatments that we kind of go through as Yeah, you have your what do you call them? Your guys that run the neurofeedback?
Neurofeedback technicians.
Okay,
Yeah.
So the stuff that they run us through, I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about the science. There's like a few different modalities about it.
Yeah. So there's a few different types actually. So biofeedback and neurofeedback is basically you're feeding back information to the brain or the body via stimulus. So you're kind of rewarding the brain or removing reward when your brain is not doing kind of what we're hoping to see it do. So it's a form of operant conditioning. So what we do is we put a cap on the brain and we select different networks in the brain that we want to either see you inhibit or we want to see you activate. When your brain is doing kind of what we want it to do and we're seeing either the activation or the inhibition going on or the communication, right, where we're seeing the brain like, okay, this is how we want you to communicate because you've lost communication from a concussion, for instance. What'll happen is you'll get either video feedback, game feedback, or music feedback, letting your brain know like, yeah, that's good. And then when your brain does what we don't want it to do, where it like goes back to a state where it's wanting to disconnect, where it's wanting to inhibit more than we want it to, or if it's wanting to overactivate more than we want it to, like you'd see in trauma, then the stimulus goes black. So the video goes black, sound cuts out, and the brain will develop optimal frustration because it likes stimulus. Right, like tech companies have known this for years.
Yeah, no shit.
The more stimulus we get, the better.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because the amygdala feels like when it gets more information, it can make a better decision. That's not always true. Sometimes too much information is just too much information, and you don't actually know how to make a decision, right? So it's just bringing in information like crazy, and that's all it's really is trained to do. So we just go, okay, you're not going to get any info until you shift the way you're communicating. And so what'll happen is the brain will start shifting itself to get more of that feedback. It's called brain-computer interface.
Okay.
So this is first done in cats, actually, in the 1970s. And then we found that cats could be damaged by a chemical that caused seizures. And then we could actually train them out of those seizures, even though they're chemically damaged, by training their brain to upregulate a frequency called SMR. And then we were like, well, maybe we can just inhibit their brain in SMR and cause seizures. Turns out we could. And then we could just train their brain back out of it again. And then we translated that to humans and epilepsy, and that's how the field was formed. And so, it's just about providing that feedback so the brain can understand, okay, this is good. Like, I want more stimulus, so I'll just do whatever I need to do to get more stimulus. So we kind of play on that operant conditioning interface, and it all happens subconsciously because, again, these decisions are being made before we're even consciously aware of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so over time, what you'll see is the brain will learn to communicate differently. It'll learn to activate differently. It'll learn to calm networks down that shouldn't be overactivated. You can do all sorts of things. You can do trauma processing. You can do you can shift the idling rate of the brain. The brain has an idling rate called alpha peak, kind of like when you turn your car on, it revs up. We can get it to rev a little faster if we need to, or we can get it to rev a little slower if we need to. So there's all sorts of different things we can adjust with that, and it's
mind control.
Yeah,
Over
it's crazy.
but it's cool because you can select the different pathways that you let the brain kind of shift through.
Yeah.
So at first you can give the brain a whole bunch of different options. It's like, okay, here you go. Like there's 100 different options you can do to shift. And then over time, you can actually narrow that down to the point where you're getting to the nitty gritty and saying, we're only going to give you this one option. This is all you're going to get stimulus for. And then we can get a little more specific. And so it's basically guided neuroplasticity. So we can get the baseline state to shift. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like Jared said, it's like different reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things that go into it, right? Like I did this whole supplement protocol. I did the peptides. I did the neurofeedback. I'm also doing EMDR, and it's like everything at once. And it's like, wow, my whole world has turned around. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's the benefit of knowing everything you're dealing with, because you can, if the brain's saying we can deal with all this at once, then we can deal with it all at once, right? And you can just get that much quicker of a shift. Yeah.
Wow, Nirvana Health.
Go check them out. I bet you'll have an influx of motocross racers coming in now.
Which is good.
That's good.
No, honestly, almost every
100%.
rider should be going 100%. To see Nirvana Health or someone like Nirvana Health, now, or at least looking into it for the future, because this
and you know what we found too with working with athletes as well is you have that that like 0.1 0.2% that even if you're feeling good and you can just push that optimal level. And I know a few guys in motocross that have been like placing way higher than they normally did previously.
Really?
And like just
Yeah.
through neurofeedback, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen it with Olympians, we've seen it with hockey players. It's just that it just gives you that edge, right?
Yeah.
Like if your brain is processing things even 10 milliseconds faster, that what that equates to, is incredible. Wow. So
Yeah.
I know I feel good. Most days I feel great. I still do neurofeedback because it just gives me an edge, right? So
yeah.
So this is something like you would recommend to even someone who had maybe a mild concussion, or not even, maybe they just feel depressed or something, and they can go every once in a while. They could do neurofeedback just to sharpen up a little bit.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I usually do 4 or 5 sessions every 4 to 6 months.
Okay,
and
that's
just
reasonable.
Sharpen things up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I guess the problem becomes people don't want to spend the money, right?
Yeah, well, and that's each their own. I mean, it's whatever you value.
Yeah.
If you value, to me, like my brain is like the only thing I have, right?
That's all you have. Like that's where I was kind of at the point where I'm like, what? Like, yeah, I could maybe go into debt going into this program, but is it really worth not going into debt to live like a half-ass life kind of thing? Like,
exactly.
You might as well live life to your full potential.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just kind of the way that society is right now. People are more valued of the things they have and the money they have in their bank account.
Yeah.
But I think people should be more worried about the thing, like how they feel and the quality of their life.
Yeah.
Right. Like money doesn't always bring better quality of life.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it comes back to what Chris said earlier too, where if you haven't been in that dark place, you don't know that you ever have potential to lose anything, right? So it's hard, it's hard to try to get people to understand that. But
people need to ask themselves, why do they think the money is important?
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Ask why 5 times.
Or what was it again? It was ask the hard question. No, I don't even remember it now.
Quality of your life is based on the quality of questions you ask.
There it is.
Holy shit.
Quality of life isn't based on your money. It's based on the quality of the questions you ask yourself, right there.
Holy shit, that's mind-blowing.
And you know what? A lot of the money and a lot of the possession stuff is it's an attachment issue. It's a trauma problem.
Hey, look at this.
Yeah.
Full circle.
We're fixing life problems here today.
I feel like you could almost be a psychologist too.
Oh, well, say that until you meet my wife. And
Hold
then,
on. We got one more question, okay?
All right.
When we were looking at your bio there, found a little interesting tidbit. I don't know if this is true or not. It said you're a detective.
Probably medical detective.
Medical
is probably what it
detective.
was.
Okay, I thought Chris is like, maybe he investigates crime scenes. Like, I don't think so, man.
That's my next life journey.
Yeah, I was like, you never know. He could be a real detective. He could be, finding out people's brain problems and other problems.
maybe I'll like get a job with the FBI and just like lie detector testing, but with brain.
There we
imaging.
go.
Yeah.
Right?
See, this guy committed murder because he had PTSD from a young age. And
Yeah. Oh wow.
Profiling.
That's good. Yeah. Okay, we got to the bottom of the detective situation.
That's funny. That's funny.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. I mean, it's hard to compare that podcast to any other podcast we've done, but that was unbelievable. Thank you so much, and we just love bringing awareness to the community. And I think you're gonna have probably some good intake.
Hopefully
from some motocross people. So motocross people hit their head all the time, and they want to sweep it under the rug. And hopefully this brings.
But I think it's coming to light in our sport
big
too.
Time, yeah.
And if even a couple people go and get help, that's a start.
Yeah,
that's a start,
absolutely.
right?
You gotta build momentum somewhere. Yeah. So it spreads quick. It's great. It's so good. I have to commend you guys for what you're doing. This is awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. We'll wrap that up then.
Yep.
You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks so much.